Hello everyone, I'm the Creep's Cabin. I know you use these videos to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. When I was around 13, one evening stands out to me more clearly than most of that year. It wasn't a special night or a holiday or anything you'd expect to remember a decade later. My mom and dad had invited over our old neighbors from the block of flats we used to live in until I was about 5 years old. At that point, I barely remembered anything from back then. We'd moved when I was still really young, and apart from a few hazy memories of gray concrete stairwells, the smell of old carpet in the corridors, and a noisy playground surrounded by metal fencing, most of it had faded into the background. They were all sitting in the living room that night, drinking tea and catching up, while I was told to head to bed. I didn't argue. I wasn't particularly close to those neighbors. They were just familiar adult faces from old photo albums and a few birthday parties I couldn't fully recall. I went up to my room, pulled the door nearly shut behind me, and lay on my bed fully clothed, just listening. The walls in our house were thin. Voices carried easily. I could hear the low hum of the adults talking, the occasional burst of laughter, the scrape of a chair against the floor, and spoons clinking against ceramic mugs. Nothing unusual. But then I heard something that made me freeze a little. The woman, I later remembered her name was Sheila, said something that stood out sharply against the rest of the normal chit-chat. She said something like, "Hey Digsy's mom, do you remember when Digsy used to say there was someone in his room? Well, there's a new family upstairs from us now, just moved in. They've got a little boy, about 3 years old, and he's saying the same things. The exact same things Digsy used to." At first, I thought I misheard. The name Digsy was their nickname for me when I was little. I don't remember how it started, probably some toddler thing I did that stuck. But no one had called me that in years. Hearing it again made my ears tune in harder, and I waited, expecting someone to say more. I heard Mum give this kind of half-laugh, and then her tone dropped lower. I couldn't hear every word, but she sounded surprised, like genuinely taken off guard. I picked up some murmurs, footsteps, gone missing, and something about a record player, but that was all. Dad said something that made everyone laugh again, and the moment passed. But I couldn't let it go. I just lay there, staring up at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. The next morning, it stuck with me. It's weird how sometimes things that seem confusing or creepy late at night feel totally different in the daylight. But this didn't fade. If anything, I felt more pulled to it. I didn't remember ever being scared in that old flat. I didn't remember saying someone was in my room. I didn't remember anything weird. But the way they talked about it, it sounded real. Not a joke, not some ghost story for fun. Real. I asked Mum about it later that day. She was folding laundry in her room when I brought it up. I tried to be casual, just saying I'd overheard something last night. When I told her what I heard, she stopped folding, looked at me, and said something that still sticks in my head. She said, "You don't remember?" That hit me harder than I expected, because that reaction told me right away that this wasn't something small. This was something she'd expected I'd never forget. She sat down on the bed and told me everything. She said it started gradually when we lived in the flat. I would have been around 3 or 4. I started saying things about someone being in my room. She didn't think much of it at first. Kids have vivid imaginations. I was at that age where imaginary friends, fears of the dark, and monsters in the closet weren't unusual. But it kept happening. She said I didn't act scared, just kind of bothered. Like I was annoyed. I'd complain that someone walked into my room during the night, stood near the bed, then walked out. Sometimes I said they sat on the floor or stood in the hallway. Then she said things started going missing. Small things. A spoon, a roll of tape, my socks, keys. Always little things that could be easily misplaced, but they kept turning up in strange spots, like inside the laundry basket, behind the toilet, once even in the microwave. That last one made her feel off. She said she started checking doors and windows more carefully after that. The weirdest thing, though, was the footsteps. She said that was the moment she realized it wasn't just a kid's imagination. She and Dad would both hear them. Light steps, slow ones, pacing the hallway outside the bedrooms. But every time they got up to check, nothing. No one. Once or twice they thought maybe it was the neighbor's kid upstairs, but the layout of the building meant there wasn't an apartment directly over our hallway. The building was oddly shaped, an old design where flats stacked like offset bricks. Our hallway ceiling backed onto another wall, not a floor. She said the final straw happened during the day, when she was home alone with me. I was playing with blocks in the living room, and she was listening to music on the record player. Something old and slow, one of her favorites. She was folding laundry, always folding laundry, it seems, and the record started to drag. Not scratchy or skipping, just slowing down. Like someone was holding the edge of the vinyl lightly, pressing down to stop it. She thought the player was breaking, but when she looked at it, nothing seemed off. And then it stopped. Not the song. The whole record stopped turning. Just like that. The power was fine. Nothing else shut off. And then, she told me, something came over her. Not fear, anger. She said she'd had enough. Whatever it was, whatever it wasn't, she just shouted, "Leave us the fuck alone," loud and clear. She said the second those words left her mouth, the record spun back to life like nothing had happened. No slowing, no warping, just music playing like before. And that was it. After that day, nothing else happened. No footsteps, no missing items, nothing. And a few months later, we moved. The thing that unsettled me most wasn't the story itself. It was that I had no memory of any of it. You'd think if I had been so bothered by someone being in my room, it would have stuck. But nothing. It was like it had all been wiped clean. I remembered the building, the general feel of it, even the playground outside. But nothing from inside that flat. Not my room. Not any fear. Not even the weird stuff Mum described. It felt like a part of my early life had been cut out. As I got older, I started to think about it more. Sometimes late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd go back over everything Mum told me. I'd picture that flat. I could barely remember the layout. I tried once to draw it from memory, and the more I tried to pin it down, the more I felt like I was just making it up. That only made it worse. There's a certain kind of unease that comes not from being scared, but from not knowing whether you should be scared. By the time I was in my 20s, I became more skeptical of stories like that. I started chalking things up to misremembered childhoods, stress, sleep deprivation, faulty wiring, and the usual explanations. But the thing I could never shake was how I found out. I didn't hear it from my parents. I didn't remember it myself. I only learned about it years later, by accident, from someone else describing something happening again. Almost the exact same thing, to a different kid, in the same building, above the same flat. I never went back to that building. Mum said it was a rough area now, not worth seeing again. But a few years back, I tried to look it up online, just out of curiosity. I wanted to see the layout, maybe find a floor plan. I couldn't find anything detailed. Just a photo of the outside, gray concrete walls, rows of small windows, metal doors. It looked almost abandoned, and I wondered for a while what I'd do if I went back and stood outside. Would something come back to me? Would I remember that hallway, that bedroom? Would it feel like anything? Or would it be as empty as the memories I didn't have? To this day, I've never had another experience like it. Nothing has ever felt off in that way again. I've had strange dreams, sure. Once I had sleep paralysis during university, and I saw a shadow in the corner that disappeared when I finally moved. But that's different. That has a name, an explanation. What happened in that flat doesn't. I've come to a kind of peace with it. I don't need to know exactly what happened. I believe my mom. She's not the kind of person to exaggerate. And even if there was a logical explanation, it doesn't change the fact that something happened that stayed with her for years. Something strange enough that even talking about it, a decade later, brought back that sharp look in her eyes. Like she'd gone straight back to that moment in the room, with the record player slowing to a stop. Whatever it was, it ended. Whatever she did, shouting, getting angry, setting a boundary, it worked. I never had a single weird experience after that. And that kid, the one living above us years later, I never heard what happened to him. I don't know if it stopped for him too. Maybe his parents did something. Maybe he just grew out of it. Or maybe it kept going. That's the part that bothers me sometimes. Not knowing if it ended. Not knowing if that same pattern is happening again to some other family, in that same flat. A new kid, waking up in the night, complaining about someone standing in the corner. Missing objects. Footsteps in the hall. A record slowing to a stop. And someone else, years later, remembering nothing at all. When I was about 10 years old, there was this one night that stayed with me all my life, like a splinter under the skin that never works its way out. Not because anything violent or terrible happened in the obvious sense, but because something did happen that I've never been able to explain. And that quiet, creeping confusion, combined with the feeling that something about the world doesn't quite add up, has stuck with me longer than most of the loud, chaotic memories ever could. My dad had gone duck hunting that day with 3 of his buddies. Men I knew just enough to recognize by voice or silhouette, but didn't really talk too much. They were a rough bunch, country men like my dad, the kind who wore the same old flannels year-round, smelled like tobacco and gunpowder, and told loud stories that were half-lies even before the beer started. I remember watching them load up in the truck that morning, the sun not even up yet, steam from their breaths rising in the cold air, the dull clatter of guns and gear in the back, dogs barking from the crates in the bed. It was the kind of day where everything seemed ordinary. My mom made pancakes. I played with some plastic army men on the living room rug. The house was quiet in that special way it only was when Dad was gone, like it had more room to breathe, less tension stuffed in the corners. My mom seemed more relaxed too. She was still herself, but lighter somehow, less bracing for something. She let me stay up late, not too late, but later than normal. We watched a movie together, something on VHS, and I remember her nodding off halfway through, her legs tucked under a blanket on the couch. Around 10, she blinked herself awake and told me it was time for bed. I didn't argue. I never really did. I was a quiet kid, observant, and mostly stayed in my own head. I think a part of me liked my room anyway. It was mine, it was predictable, and it had a little reading light clipped to the bedpost, which gave just enough glow to read comics without Mom noticing. I got into bed, pulled the blankets over my head like always, listened for the old furnace clicking on and off downstairs, and waited for sleep to come. I drifted off at some point, I'm not sure when, but it wasn't that deep kind of sleep where you dream and forget you're dreaming. It was light, scattered. The kind where every creak of the floorboards or pop from the walls makes you shift and half wake up. Somewhere around midnight, I heard the truck come back. The familiar crunch of tires on gravel, the slam of doors, the bark of one of the dogs, muffled by the distance. Then the voices started, faint through the walls at first, but getting louder as they all came into the house. I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake off that heavy, slow feeling that comes from waking in the middle of the night. I wasn't scared or anything, just curious. It was rare for me to be awake when the grown-ups were talking, and I had always liked the low hum of their voices from the kitchen, like some distant radio station that played stories instead of music. I crept out of bed, careful to avoid the one floorboard that creaked outside my door, and sat down with my back to the wall, ear turned toward the kitchen down the hall. The door was cracked open just a bit, and I could see a slice of yellow light spilling onto the floor. Their voices were clearer now. My dad was laughing about something, and then one of his friends, a guy named Earl, I think, started into a story about the boat nearly capsizing that morning. I could picture the scene even though I hadn't been there. 4 men in camo, scrambling around in a little aluminum boat, gear sliding across the floor, one of them yelling while the dog panicked. But it was as the story went on that something strange started happening. I knew what Earl was going to say before he said it. At first, I thought it was just one of those weird déjà vu feelings. Like you get this flash that you've lived a moment before, even though it's impossible. But then it happened again, and again. I heard the words in my head. 2, maybe 3 seconds before they came out of Earl's mouth. My first thought was that maybe I had overheard this story before. Maybe Earl had told it years ago, and I just didn't remember consciously. Maybe it was a story my dad had repeated, and the details were buried in the back of my mind. But then my dad started telling a different story, one I had definitely never heard before, about how he and Greg, another one of the guys, had gotten separated in the marsh and started calling out like idiots, thinking one of them had fallen in. I hadn't heard that one. I was sure. But as he was talking, the words were already forming in my mouth before he said them. I found myself mouthing the phrases, almost like I was reading from a script, and then hearing him say them exactly, word for word. At some point, I started whispering them aloud, soft, just enough for me to hear, mouthing the next part of the story before my dad got there. It wasn't like guessing. I wasn't predicting. I knew what came next. It was like remembering a dream, just as it starts to happen again. I remember my whole body feeling cold. Not the kind of cold from the air, but the kind that spreads out from your chest and stomach when you realize something is very wrong, but can't name it yet. My fingers were shaking. I had to put my hand over my mouth to stop myself from whispering out loud. I suddenly felt like I wasn't supposed to be doing that. Like if anyone heard me, something worse than getting in trouble would happen. I pulled my knees up to my chest and just sat there, staring at the crack of light from the kitchen. The voices kept coming, stories and laughter, little side comments, beer bottles clinking on the table. And every single line I already knew. It was like I had already lived that conversation, like I had dreamed the whole thing. Every word, every pause, every tone, sometime before I woke up. But I couldn't remember doing that. There was no memory of a dream. Just this overwhelming familiarity as it unfolded. I stayed there a long time, maybe an hour or more. After a while, I stopped listening to the words. I stopped mouthing along. I just sat still, staring down the hallway, feeling like the whole house had tilted a few degrees off its foundation and nobody had noticed but me. The laughter from the kitchen didn't sound comforting anymore. It sounded hollow, like something trying too hard to seem normal. Eventually, the voices started fading. I think they all decided to go out to the shed or the back porch to smoke or clean gear or something. I took the chance to get up, legs numb from sitting, and crept back into bed. I lay there stiff as a board, eyes on the ceiling, too afraid to even blink hard. Sleep didn't come easy. I kept thinking about what had just happened, trying to explain it to myself. Maybe I really had dreamed the whole thing. Maybe my brain had pulled fragments of stories I'd overheard before and stitched them together in my sleep. But that didn't explain how I had known exact phrases, whole sentences, that I'd never heard before. It didn't explain the timing, how I always whispered the line a few seconds before the person said it, like I was reading subtitles ahead of a dubbed movie. Even in my 10-year-old mind, I knew this wasn't normal. When I finally fell asleep, it was out of exhaustion, not comfort. The next morning, I didn't say anything. I never told my mom, never mentioned it to my dad. I went downstairs, poured cereal, and acted like nothing was wrong. But something had changed, not just in me, but in how I saw everything. From that night on, I've never fully trusted the world around me. It's like a thin layer of something fake got peeled away, and underneath was something off. Like we're all walking through a movie set built over something older and stranger that we can't quite see. I started noticing other small things over the years. Nothing dramatic, just moments where time felt too smooth, too rehearsed. Where people said things I was sure they'd said before even when they hadn't. Where I walked into a place I'd never been, but felt like I knew every corner. I never had an experience quite like that night again. Not with the word-for-word prediction, but that sense of pre-existence, that the moment I'm living has already been lived by some earlier version of me. It's never left. I don't know what caused it. I don't believe in psychic stuff or ghosts or any of that. I don't think it was a vision or divine message. If anything, I think it was just a crack in the machine. A moment where whatever keeps time and reality glued together slipped, and I got a peek behind the curtain. Maybe it was a glitch in my brain. Maybe I dreamed it all in some deep, hidden part of sleep that only surfaced when the real moment caught up. But I know what I experienced. I know the feeling of whispering someone's words just before they speak them. I know the cold panic of realizing you're not supposed to know what comes next, and knowing it anyway. And ever since then, I've carried the quiet fear that none of this is as real as we think. That maybe we're just following tracks already laid down. That maybe we're not making choices so much as reenacting them, over and over, in loops we'll never quite recognize until it's too late. And I'll tell you this, if it happens again, if I ever find myself predicting reality word for word, I don't know if I'll be able to just sit and listen next time. I think I'll need to find out who or what is really writing the script. For as long as I can remember, sleep has never just been sleep for me. It's never been a simple matter of laying my head down and drifting off. Since I was a teenager, maybe younger, there was always this strange lead-up whenever I'd enter certain kinds of dreams. It wasn't every night. It didn't happen often. But when it did, it followed a very specific pattern. It would start the moment I'd close my eyes. I wouldn't even be asleep yet. Just in that drifting space, the floaty half place between being awake and fully under. That's when the faces would come. It's hard to describe them the right way. People always think you mean hallucinations or sleep paralysis or just regular dreams. But this was different. I wasn't paralyzed. I could open my eyes, move, get up, turn on the light, snap myself out of it. But if I let myself sink in, if I kept my eyes shut and just let the process unfold, that's when I'd see them. The faces weren't just in my mind. They were visual, like watching a movie, but not on a screen. They were angry, not yelling or contorted or exaggerated, just deeply, silently furious. They came toward me, not in a jump scare kind of way, just slowly, one after another, then faded off to the sides as if they were passing me in a hallway or some kind of tunnel. Then another one would appear, closer, angrier, and drift away. Human faces, animal faces, sometimes even cartoon-like ones. But they were always angry, always watching me. The first few times it happened, I'd panic and snap myself out of it. It was too weird, too intense. But after a while, I noticed something strange. When I let the faces come, when I accepted them and allowed myself to drift deeper, that's when I'd start dreaming about this place. The place didn't have a name. Not to me, anyway. But I knew it like I knew my hometown, maybe even better. It was like a small city tucked away in another layer of reality. The people there weren't figments or dream logic filler. They felt like real people. People I remembered, like friends I'd grown up with. They had homes, jobs, routines. I had memories of places there, alleys, parks, shops, a train station. It felt lived in, familiar. Like it existed somewhere else entirely, and I was just visiting. Every time I returned, I felt like I had never left. Like time had passed there even when I wasn't around. I didn't tell people about it at first. Partly because I didn't want to sound insane, but mostly because I didn't want to ruin it. It felt private. Sacred even. Like the more I talked about it, the more I might tear a hole in it and lose access. But curiosity got the better of me once. I told a few close friends. Just a little. Described a street corner I liked, an old bookstore I used to dream walk through, a friend who always wore a blue scarf. They thought it was interesting. I regretted telling them immediately. The next time I saw the angry faces before falling asleep, I felt excited. I thought I was going back. But when I got there, something was off. The light was dimmer. The colors felt dull. The people I knew were there, but they weren't smiling. They stared at me, not with familiarity, but with suspicion, anger. And then they shot me. It wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't symbolic. It was violent, detailed, visceral. One man I knew, someone who used to work in a cafe I always visited in my dreams, walked into a room I was standing in, raised a gun, and shot me in the chest. I fell, gasping. The pain was real, but even more real was the confusion. Why? Why would they do this? I woke up, or at least I thought I did. I was back in another part of the dream place, still alive, still moving. I thought maybe it was a fluke, some dream misfire. Then it happened again. Another person I used to know, someone who taught me how to fish in a dream lake I'd visited dozens of times, cornered me in a hallway and shot me in the back. I collapsed. I could feel blood pooling under me. I tried to crawl, but everything faded to black. Then I woke up again. This time, I was sitting on a bench in a market square I loved. There was a tree I always sat under. I looked around, expecting it to be safe, maybe reset. Then someone sat next to me, an old woman who ran a food stall I used to visit every time I came. She had the same angry face. No warmth, no recognition. Just cold, silent hatred. She pulled a revolver from her coat and shot me point blank in the face. I didn't wake up again after that. When I finally returned to regular sleep, I didn't see the angry faces anymore. I didn't go back to the place. The dreams were just dreams. Weird, normal, chaotic. I missed that other world. I missed it like you miss a childhood home after it's been demolished. For years, I tried to get back. I'd lie in bed and try to recall those angry faces. I'd keep my eyes closed and try to force them to appear. But they never came. 2 years ago, I had a dream that was different. I was walking through a dusty street market. It wasn't the place, but it felt adjacent, like it was near it or connected. People were moving through the streets with baskets and animals and carts. It had that timeless feel, like it could be any century. In the middle of the square was a well, and leaning over it was a woman in a wide purple hat. I stopped when I saw her. My stomach flipped. She turned and looked right at me. It was that look, the angry face. I stood frozen. It was like seeing a ghost from a past life. Part of me was terrified, but another part of me felt something like relief. Like maybe the place hadn't forgotten me. Maybe it still existed somewhere. Maybe I could find a way back. But she didn't approach. She didn't speak. She just stared, the hatred plain in her eyes. And then I woke up. That was the last dream I had that felt connected to the place. Now I live and work in Chicago. It's a busy city. My job at the hotel downtown puts me right in the thick of things. I see people constantly, travelers, business people, wanderers, drifters. I used to drive, but I sold my car last winter and started taking the bus and train. It's cheaper and easier, but it also puts me in contact with more people than I ever used to be around. 6 months ago, something happened that changed everything. I was walking to the train after work, cutting through a busy stretch near the theater district. The crowd was thick, everyone rushing in every direction. I was scanning ahead, trying to find a gap to move through, when I saw her. The woman from the dream. The one with the purple hat. She wasn't dressed the same, no wide-brimmed hat this time, but I knew it was her. Same eyes, same face, same expression. That same simmering fury, like I'd betrayed her personally. She was standing across the street, staring straight at me. Not moving, not blinking. I froze. My legs went cold. It was broad daylight. I was awake. I checked. I looked at signs, watched people walk past, felt the city noise in my ears. I wasn't dreaming. Then she turned and walked into the crowd. I pushed through traffic and ran across the street to follow her. But by the time I got there, she was gone, like she had dissolved into the crowd. Since then, it's happened again. First once a month, then more often. I've seen others. Faces I recognize from that place. People I used to sit with, talk to, walk past. People who lived in that dream world. They're here now. In Chicago. On the subway. In the hotel lobby. Walking through the park. Not every day, not predictable. But they appear. Just long enough for me to lock eyes with them. Just long enough for them to let me know they see me. And they're always angry. Every time I try to follow them, they disappear. They slip behind a pillar, turn a corner, vanish into a crowd. I've tried to take pictures. Nothing ever comes out clearly. Blurred, distant, or just empty frames. I started keeping track. Names, descriptions, locations, times. I have a notebook full of sightings now. A dozen, maybe more. No patterns, just appearances. Like they're checking on me, watching, reminding me. At first I was terrified. I thought maybe I was going insane. Maybe all those years of lucid dreaming had finally snapped something in my brain. But the fear started to shift. Now it's something else. Now it's a kind of longing. I miss that place. I miss the feeling of being part of something separate, secret. I miss the streets, the light, the smells, the rhythm of that other life. Even if they're angry, even if they shot me, even if I'm not welcome there anymore, I still want to go back. Some part of me wonders if that's what they're waiting for. If they're appearing to see if I'm ready to return. Or maybe to warn me not to try. Maybe that's the punishment, being shut out forever. Maybe dreaming about a place too much corrupts it. Maybe I push too far. Sometimes I wonder if I'm not dreaming because I already made it back. Maybe that last time, when I didn't wake up after the third shooting, maybe something happened. Maybe I crossed some kind of line, and now that world is bleeding into this one. I don't know what it means, but I know what I've seen. I know those faces. I know them better than I know most people I've met in real life. They're here, and they remember me. When my mom was about 3 years old, my grandparents moved into an apartment on the 9th floor of a high-rise building in downtown Columbus. It was the early 1970s. The building was an older one with long, echoing hallways, thick brown carpet, and the kind of radiators that clicked and hissed all night long. My grandpa had taken a job in the city, and the apartment was affordable, close to work, and offered a decent view of the skyline. To them, it was just a temporary stop until they found a house. They figured it would be a year, maybe less. The apartment itself was small, just 2 bedrooms and a tight kitchen that barely had room for a table. The walls were thin, and my grandma often complained that she could hear the neighbors walking around upstairs, though the floor above them was supposedly unoccupied. Still, they tried to settle in. My mom was their only child at the time, quiet and well-behaved, with a habit of getting lost in her own imagination. Without siblings or neighborhood kids nearby, she started spending more and more time playing alone in the corner of the living room near the window. That corner became her little world, and it wasn't long before she started talking to someone named Kathy. At first, my grandparents thought it was cute. Lots of little kids had imaginary friends. and it didn't seem like a big deal. My mom would spend hours mumbling softly in that corner, building little structures out of blocks, having tea parties with empty cups, sometimes even making room on the floor for Kathy to sit. She'd talk to her in whispers, and when my grandma would ask who she was talking to, she'd just say, "Kathy." But as the weeks passed, Kathy became more than just an imaginary friend. My mom started refusing to leave the apartment because Kathy didn't want her to. She wouldn't eat dinner unless a plate was made for Kathy too. If something spilled or broke, it was Kathy's fault. If she got in trouble, she'd say Kathy told her to do it. Eventually, she stopped playing with toys altogether unless Kathy was involved. She wouldn't touch her dolls anymore, said Kathy didn't like them. She even started refusing to go to bed unless the bedroom door was cracked open so Kathy could get in too. My grandparents were concerned, but they kept getting told the same thing. It was just a phase. They took her to a pediatrician, who shrugged it off. Then they saw a child psychologist who told them it was a normal developmental behavior, something many only children experienced. My grandma, who was deeply religious, began to worry there was something darker going on, but my grandpa dismissed it all. He didn't believe in that kind of thing. To him, it was just a sign that she needed more interaction. So after a particularly bad week, a week where my mom wouldn't stop crying unless she was sitting in her corner, whispering to Kathy, my grandpa decided to do something about it. He figured maybe a pet would give her something real to focus on, something living, breathing, something that would respond to her. So he went out one morning to the local pound and picked out a small German Shepherd puppy. He thought the dog would cheer her up, get her outside, break her out of whatever spell she was under. By the time he got back, the apartment was quiet. My grandma was folding laundry in the bedroom. My mom, as usual, was in her spot in the corner of the living room near the window. The puppy squirmed in his arms, excited and yipping. As soon as they stepped through the door, everything changed. The dog froze. Not like it was curious or confused, but like something flipped inside it. Its body went rigid. It let out a low growl, then started barking, sharp, frantic, angry barks. It first stood up straight along its back, its teeth bared. It locked eyes with my mom sitting in the corner and started lunging toward her, barking and snarling, totally out of control. My mom started screaming. She wasn't crying or startled, she was screaming. Real, terrified screaming. The kind of sound that sticks with you. My grandpa dropped the leash and grabbed her off the floor just as the dog lunged again, barking madly. My grandma came running in, confused and panicked, and together they tried to calm the dog, tried to calm my mom. The puppy, just seconds earlier sweet and curious, now looked like it was in a full-blown rage. Then just like that, it stopped. The barking cut off. The growling ended. The dog backed up and sat down, panting hard like it had just run a marathon. Its eyes still looked alert, but it was no longer trying to attack. My mom, on the other hand, was a mess. She was crying hard, pointing toward the window, her words jumbled and breathless. My grandparents didn't know what to make of it. They kept asking what happened, what was wrong, and all she would say, over and over again, was that Kathy had fallen out of the window. She wouldn't say anything else. After that, she never played in the corner again. She didn't mention Kathy again. Not once. It was like a switch flipped. No more whispers. No more tea parties. No more crying to leave the door open. My mom started playing with toys again, started acting more like a regular little kid. She didn't seem scared, just tired. Like something heavy had been lifted off her. The dog settled in well after that. My mom bonded with it almost immediately. She named him Max. Max became her shadow, always close by. She took him for walks, fed him, even tried to teach him tricks. And for a while, things felt normal again. But my grandma never shook the feeling that something was wrong with that apartment. The long hallways, the way the air felt heavy at night, the clicking radiators, the sounds from the empty apartment upstairs. She started pushing my grandpa to move. He resisted at first, saying it was just nerves, just imagination. But my grandma didn't let up. She started reading the Bible out loud at night, leaving a crucifix over my mom's bed, keeping the lights on longer than necessary. She wasn't taking chances. And after a few more months, my grandpa finally gave in. The day they moved out, my grandpa ran into the landlord in the hallway. He was handing over the keys and signing some paperwork, just chatting about the neighborhood, the building, that kind of thing. For some reason, the story of Kathy came up. My grandpa said something offhand about imaginary friends, and how their daughter had one named Kathy who fell out the window and never came back. The landlord froze. He looked like he didn't know what to say at first. Then, after a moment, he told my grandpa that a few years before they moved in, there had been a family living in that same unit. A young couple with a little girl named Kathy. She was 5. One day, she fell out of the 9th-story window, died on impact. The family moved out not long after. My grandpa didn't know what to say. He just stood there, holding the leash while Max sniffed around at his feet. The landlord kept talking, saying how it had been a freak accident. Something about the screen being loose. Nobody was sure if she fell or if she leaned too far. It was a tragedy, he said. One of those things you never forget. But the apartment had been empty for a while afterward, until my grandparents moved in. My grandpa went back down to the car, got in, and told my grandma what the landlord said. She didn't speak for the rest of the ride. When they got to the new place, she took out her Bible again and placed it on the nightstand. Even years later, she swore that something wasn't right about that apartment, that it had a weight to it, that my mom had been different when they lived there, not like herself. She blamed herself for not seeing it sooner, for trusting the doctors, for not praying more. My mom barely remembers any of it. She says she has a vague memory of a girl in a blue dress, sitting cross-legged near the window. But that's it. She doesn't even remember the incident with the dog. Just flashes, sounds, feelings, and that one moment, a girl with long brown hair, staring at her with wide eyes. As for Max, he lived a good life. Grew up alongside my mom, protected her like a big brother. He never acted out again, never barked at shadows, never growled at nothing. But for the rest of his life, he never went near that corner by the window. Not once. It's hard to explain what really happened. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe my mom made the whole thing up. Maybe the trauma of the accident from before lingered in the air, heavy and unspoken. People who don't believe in that kind of thing say it was all just a child's mind at work. But when you hear my grandma tell the story, when you see the way her hands shake as she talks about it, when you hear the silence that falls afterward, it makes you wonder. Even now, all these years later, she refuses to go near that building. It's still standing, still tall and gray with its rows of windows like blank eyes watching the street. But my grandma won't drive past it, won't speak its name. She says some things are better left alone. My mom never had another imaginary friend after that. When I was a kid, maybe around 9 or 10, we used to go visit my uncle's lodge during the school holidays. It was one of those old timber places way out on a huge chunk of land, probably hundreds of acres that backed right onto thick bushland. The kind where the trees felt like they went on forever. No fences, no trails, just miles of scrub and dirt and silence. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you're standing in someone else's house, uninvited. The lodge itself was nothing special to me back then. Just a big wooden place with a wide veranda and a couple of sheds scattered around. But as a kid, it felt like a castle. My brother and I would run around all day, building stuff out of scrap timber, digging holes we'd forget about and fall into later, chasing lizards, pretending to hunt for treasure. That kind of thing. We had our bikes too, and we'd race them down the steep gravel driveway until someone stacked it and scraped half their skin off. It was the kind of place where the grown-ups let you roam. The rule was simple: back before dark and don't go too deep into the bush. That was pretty much it. My dog Rusty, a scruffy old blue heeler, followed me everywhere. He was older than me, in dog years anyway, and never really went too far off on his own. He was just always there, like my shadow, panting beside me no matter what I was doing. I remember this one day during one of the holidays. It must have been summer because everything was hot and dry and smelled like dust. Everyone had gone into town for supplies or something. I stayed behind because I didn't feel like sitting in the back of a hot car for half the day. Dad was still there, but he was lying on the couch taking a nap. Said something about waking him if anyone came back early. So it was just me and Rusty that afternoon. I remember walking down to the dry creek bed. It hadn't seen water in months. Just cracked mud and rocks and dead branches. I liked it there because there were these smooth stones you could stack or draw on with other rocks. I was down there with Rusty, just messing around when he suddenly perked up. His ears went stiff and he stood real still. Then he bolted, took off straight into the trees like he'd seen something I couldn't. It was so sudden I didn't even have time to call his name. At first, I stood there confused, kind of half laughing, thinking he'd chase a kangaroo or a rabbit and come back. But he didn't. I called him a few times. Nothing. I even whistled. Still nothing. That's when I started getting a bit uneasy. It wasn't like him to take off like that, especially without waiting for me. After a minute or two, I decided to go after him. I told myself I wouldn't go too far. Just follow his tracks a bit, maybe call out and see if I could hear him rustling around. The thing is, the deeper you go into that bush, the faster everything starts to look the same. The light changes too. Even though it was still the middle of the afternoon, the canopy above made everything feel darker, cooler, quieter. The air felt heavier. It wasn't long before I couldn't even hear the wind anymore. I was moving fast, trying to keep my eyes open for any movement, any sound of him running through the undergrowth, but it was useless. I was calling his name louder and louder, but all I heard back was my own voice bouncing between the trees. My legs started to sting from brushing against dry shrubs, and I could feel little burrs sticking to my socks. Eventually, I stopped. I looked around and realized I had no idea where I was. The trees were thicker, and I couldn't even tell what direction I'd come from anymore. That panicky feeling started to creep in. Not full-blown fear yet, just that sense that you'd done something dumb, and now you had to fix it before anyone noticed. I turned around and tried retracing my steps, guessing where I'd come from, but everything looked the same. I picked a direction and started jogging, thinking I could find the creek again and follow it back. I didn't make it far. There must have been a root or a rock or something sticking out, but my foot caught it, and I went flying forward. I remember the rush of air, the sudden drop, and then just black. I don't know how long I was out. Could have been minutes, maybe an hour. When I came to, everything was blurry. I had this dull throbbing in my head, like when you stand up too fast, but it doesn't go away. I was lying at the bottom of a small gully, bare dirt, dry leaves, some fallen branches. The embankment above me was steep. Steep enough that I knew I couldn't climb it easily. My leg hurt too. Not broken, but definitely twisted or bruised. I moved slowly, trying to remember what happened, where I was, how I'd fallen. What actually woke me up properly was the feeling of a wet tongue on my face. It was Rusty. Somehow he'd found me. He was lying next to me, his head resting on his paws, licking my cheek. I remember smiling, just relieved to see him. I hugged him around his neck and told him, "Good boy." But then he did something strange. He stayed flat on the ground, like he was trying to disappear into the dirt, and let out this low, growling bark. Not loud, not aggressive, more like a warning. It was a sound I hadn't really heard him make before. Not even when he saw other dogs or animals. It was low and shaky, and his whole body was tense. His ears were back, and he kept his eyes fixed on something behind me. I turned my head slowly. Standing maybe 20 feet away, at the edge of the gully, was a man. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, looking down at me. He had this old, dirty cowboy hat on. One side of the brim was missing like it had been torn off or bitten. His shirt was brown and dusty, and he wore jeans that looked stiff from dried mud. Gloves too. Thick work gloves, even though it was boiling hot. He didn't seem surprised or worried or angry, just calm. He started walking down toward me, and I froze. My body tensed up like Rusty's, but he didn't make any sudden moves. He just walked slowly, then stopped a few feet away. He looked at me, then held out his hand. I stood up carefully and took it. His glove felt rough and too big for his hand. He didn't say anything, not a word, just turned and started walking up the side of the gully, tugging me gently along with him. Rusty followed close, still pressed against my side the whole time. Every couple of steps, he'd bump into me and throw off my balance, like he wanted to be between me and the man. I tried to look at the guy as we walked, but something about him made it hard. He wasn't scary exactly, but he made me feel cautious. It was hot, the kind of heat that makes your shirt stick to your back, and yet the man didn't seem to sweat. He just kept walking, boots crunching on the dry leaves, holding my hand the whole way. I watched his gloves again, thick black leather ones. Not the kind anyone wears in summer. Not out here. He didn't say anything, and I didn't either. We didn't walk long. Maybe 10 or 15 minutes at most. I recognized the creek bed when we reached it. I could hear my dad's voice in the distance calling my name. It was that usual tone, half annoyed, half concerned, like he was shouting for dinner and getting no answer. I let go of the man's hand and ran toward the sound, Rusty right beside me. I didn't even look back until I was almost at the house. I turned around, wanted to yell out something like thanks, but the man was already gone. Not walking away. Just gone. No sound, no movement in the bush. Nothing. I didn't tell Dad about the man. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd get in trouble for going too deep into the bush. Or maybe I was just confused by the whole thing. I had a headache, a sore leg, and I was more focused on eating dinner and getting an ice pack. A few days later, we went into town. Just a supply run. I was tagging along with Mum, mostly because I wanted a chocolate bar or something from the small supermarket there. It was one of those little country stores that sell everything: bread, dog food, socks, gardening tools. Everyone knew each other. People talked across aisles, joked with the cashier. I was walking near the back of the store when I saw this photo on the wall. It was black and white, probably old. It showed a man standing next to a produce stall, smiling with his dog. The man was wearing that same hat. That same torn cowboy hat with the chunk missing on the side. I froze. I just stared at it for a while, trying to process it. Same build, same kind of shirt, even the gloves. I got Mum and pointed at it, told her that was the man who helped me in the woods. She looked at the photo, then looked at me strange. One of the workers nearby overheard. She came over and smiled and said something like, "Ah yeah, that's old Mr. Rogerson. He used to own this place a long time ago. Grew his own veggies out in the bushland. Bit of a local legend." I asked what happened to him. The woman's face shifted a bit, like she wasn't sure how much to say. Then she told me. Apparently, he died about 30 years ago. Went missing during a storm while checking on one of his bush gardens. His dog had slipped down a steep embankment, and he'd gone after it. A branch came down in the wind and crushed his back. They didn't find him for weeks. He died down in a small gully. His dog was lying next to him the whole time. It died there too. Starved. They were found together. I didn't say anything. Just nodded. I never brought it up again. Not to Mum, not to Dad, not to anyone. But I went home and hugged Rusty tighter than I ever had before. And I never, ever followed him into the bush again. I've always been a night owl. Sleep has never come easy to me. My body just doesn't seem wired like most people's. I get tired in the middle of the day. But once night rolls in, I start feeling more awake. Maybe it's from growing up the way I did, in a house full of early risers, farmers, and morning people who were all up at the crack of dawn. I think part of me just resisted it. Whatever the reason, I've never been good at falling asleep, especially not early. So over the years, I got used to being alone at night, doing little things to pass the time, reading whatever book I had nearby, wandering aimlessly on the internet, sometimes even just walking laps around the living room to wear myself out. And when the moon was bright enough, I'd go for a walk outside. Growing up on a farm in rural East Texas meant space wasn't an issue. Our place had wide pastures, an old barn, and a few sheds scattered about. It wasn't some massive cattle operation, just a small farm with some livestock, chickens, and enough land around to feel like the world dropped away when the sun set. On clear nights, it could be peaceful in a way that was hard to explain. Crickets chirping in the grass, the sound of cattle shifting in the distance, maybe a coyote calling from somewhere across the hills. That night started like most of my others. It was a little after midnight. I'd been lying in bed for nearly an hour, staring at the ceiling, shifting my legs, flipping the pillow. Sleep just wouldn't come. I got up, pulled on a pair of jeans, threw on a hoodie, and slid on my old worn-out sneakers. I figured a walk out by the pasture might help me calm down. Maybe the cool air would do the trick. Maybe I'd walk long enough to get tired enough to sleep. I didn't bother with a flashlight. The moon was almost full, and everything was lit up just enough to make my way around. As I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch, I felt that usual stillness. You can always tell when something's off out here because the natural noise of the land disappears. But that night, everything seemed normal, until I noticed a shape near the barn. It wasn't moving fast, just slowly walking from one side to the other. At first I thought it might have been my dad checking something out, but that didn't make much sense. He was a light sleeper, sure, but he wouldn't be out wandering the barn without saying something. I squinted into the dim light, letting my eyes adjust. That's when I noticed the man was carrying something. I couldn't make it out at first. Looked like maybe a toolbox or a small case, but something about the way he moved didn't sit right. He didn't walk like someone who belonged here. The creak of the porch door must have alerted him, because he stopped. I froze. The man turned toward me. The distance from the porch to the barn was only about 25 yards, but in that moment it felt like nothing. Close enough that I could just barely make out what he was holding. Not a toolbox. A gun. A long one, maybe a rifle or a shotgun. My chest clenched so tight it felt like my ribs were trying to hold back my heartbeat. I stepped back inside, shut the door softly, then threw the deadbolt in place. It had been unlocked. Out here, that wasn't unusual. But suddenly, it felt like a massive mistake. I backed away from the door, trying to breathe, trying to think. My legs carried me down the hallway before I even fully processed what I was doing. I pushed into my parents' room and woke my dad. My voice was shaking as I told him what I saw. He sat up fast, reached into his closet, and pulled out his old pump-action shotgun. My mom grabbed the phone and started dialing the sheriff. The nearest town was 15, maybe 20 minutes away, so we knew it'd be a while before anyone got out to us. My dad looked at me, gave a small nod, and we stepped outside. The air felt different now, colder, stiller, heavier. The kind of quiet that made your ears ring because nothing natural was moving. Not a cow, not a goat, not even Velcro, our old barn cat. We walked slowly at first, but then picked up the pace, crossing the yard toward the barn where I'd seen the man. We had a few cattle, a handful of goats, a cranky donkey that didn't like anyone, 6 or 7 chickens, and that raggedy old cat who seemed immortal. But none of them were there. The barn was empty. Normally, even if they were spooked, you'd expect to hear them breathing, shifting, moving in the darkness, but it was like they had vanished. That was almost more unsettling than the man himself. We moved carefully through the barn, checking the stalls, the feed room, the little side shed we used for tools. Someone had definitely tried to force that shed door open. The wood around the handle was splintered, like someone had shoved a crowbar into it and leaned their full weight. But they hadn't gotten in. That was the only obvious sign anything had happened. We did a wider sweep of the area, checking the perimeter of the barn, looking into the shadows and listening hard. But there was nothing. Not a single sound. Eventually we stopped. There wasn't much we could do until the cops showed up, so we ended up waiting in the barn. Dad kept an old fridge in there, locked up with a padlock because it held beers, sodas, and the kind of snacks he didn't want the rest of us raiding. He cracked it open and handed me a beer. I took it even though I didn't feel much like drinking. We leaned against the chicken coop and sat there, saying nothing, just watching the yard. When the cops arrived, we told them everything. They searched the area again, found some footprints leading in from the back fence, probably where the guy had come in, and the cracked wood on the shed. But nothing else. No sign of the man. No real damage. No reason to stay around. They said he must have taken off when we spooked him. That was it. They left. We sat there a little longer, leaning on the chicken coop again, finishing our beers. Then we went back inside and tried to sleep. It was late. The adrenaline had burned off, and I was exhausted. And by then, it felt like whatever danger had been there was gone. We were wrong. When the sun came up and the day started properly, I got up and wandered out back. I was tired but wired, and I just wanted to do something normal. I figured I'd check the coop and collect eggs like I usually did. But when I reached for the latch and opened the door, I froze. Inside the coop, every single chicken was dead. All of them, neck twisted, feathers everywhere, blood smeared across the floor in dark brown clumps. It was quiet. Too quiet. Not even the flies had found them yet. My stomach dropped. It didn't take much to piece together what had happened. While Dad and I had been standing outside the coop, leaning against it, drinking our beers and thinking the worst was over, that man had been inside the entire time. Just a few inches of plywood and mesh separating us. Inside, killing our chickens one by one, probably listening to us, maybe watching through the slats. We'd been so close. We thought we were safe. We thought he was gone. And it wasn't just the fact that he was in there that bothered me. It was what it meant. He hadn't just panicked and run off. He'd hidden, waited, and the only reason he'd killed the chickens was probably to keep them quiet. If even one had made noise, we might have checked inside. The coop was big enough to hide in, old wood, hay stacked in the corner, feeders and water trays creating shadows. Easy enough for a man to crouch and go unnoticed, especially in the dark. We called the sheriff again. They came back out, took photos, asked more questions, looked angrier this time. They walked the property again, looking for more footprints, more evidence. They found some disturbed ground along the back fence, like maybe he'd climbed over it and landed hard. But nothing else. No prints past that point, like he'd disappeared into the woods. That day was a long one. Mom was shaken. Dad barely spoke. I couldn't stop thinking about how close he'd been. Every time I looked at the coop, I remembered standing against it, sipping beer, thinking we were in control. The image of those chickens, their bodies stacked and limp, stuck with me. We replaced the lock on the coop, added motion lights around the barn, and started keeping the doors locked at night. It took weeks for things to feel normal again. The animals slowly calmed down. We got new chickens, but I never walked the pasture at night again, even when the moon was bright. I still can't sleep easily. I still stay up late. But now, when I walk around the house at night, I check the locks. I check the windows. I look out toward the barn and make sure nothing's moving, because I know what quiet can hide, and I know how close danger can come without making a sound. I was 12 years old the night it happened, but I can still feel the air from that night in my lungs like it was yesterday. We were out in the woods of southern Ohio, thick with trees that looked like dark walls when the sun dropped below the ridge. I remember the way the light faded quicker out there than it did at home, how the colors bled from the sky and everything just turned into shadows. My uncle was a quiet man. He didn't like wasting time, and he didn't like bringing people along who couldn't hold their own. But he took me hunting because I didn't mess around. I didn't complain or get scared easy. At least, I hadn't before that night. It was coon hunting season, and we had 2 red-bone hounds with us. Big dogs. Strong. Their names were Ruger and Bell, both trained as good as you can train a hound. I'd seen them chase raccoons across thick woods, across streams, even go nose-to-nose with a bear once. They didn't back down, not even a step. That was just how they were. The woods we were in weren't unfamiliar. We'd hunted that stretch of forest a few times before. It wasn't far from the old strip mine roads, a few miles deep off a logging path, full of hollow hills and thick tree lines. There were stories, of course. People always talk when you're in a place that still feels untouched. Stories about old miners who never came back out, and weird lights, and noises people chalk up to moonshine or coyotes. But no one ever told those stories like they really believed them. They were just things folks said when the fire got low and the beer was running out. We got to the drop-off point around 8 p.m., just as the last light was slipping away behind the hills. My uncle parked the truck on a flat bit of clearing next to a stand of pine. The dogs knew the drill. We let them out and they started pacing, noses low, tails stiff. The woods were quiet, save for a few crickets and the low creak of trees shifting with the breeze. The air was cool, that kind of late fall chill that settles in your bones. We set out with the dogs leading, both of us carrying our lights and gear. My uncle always walked steady, slow but never hesitating. He didn't say much, he never did. But that night he was even quieter than usual. I thought maybe he was just focused. I was mostly watching the dogs, the way they moved through the brush like they were chasing something already, even though we hadn't heard a single bark yet. About 30 minutes in, the dogs struck scent. They both let out short, sharp barks and took off through a stand of trees. We followed fast. You learn to move quickly, but carefully when you're coon hunting. You can't just barrel through the woods. You have to listen, feel the ground, know where your feet are landing. The terrain out there is full of hidden dips, loose rocks, old brush piles. My uncle kept a good pace, but I was younger and kept up just fine. They treed about 10 minutes later. Both dogs were barking hard, up against an old oak that leaned just slightly to one side. The coon was there, up in the fork. My uncle pointed his light and nodded. I remember thinking how still everything was besides the dogs. No wind, no night noises. Just the hounds barking and our boots crunching dry leaves. We didn't shoot. My uncle had this thing about giving younger raccoons a pass if they weren't worth skinning. Said there was no point in wasting a life if it wasn't going to be used. So we called the dogs back, which took some time, and started heading in a different direction. That's when things started to feel off. It wasn't sudden at first. It was just this weird quiet. The kind that doesn't feel like nature, but like something holding nature back. No crickets. No wind. Not even the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. I noticed the dogs slowed down on their own. Their tails lowered, and they stayed closer to us. That was strange. Usually they stayed ahead, always pushing, always sniffing. But now they walked like they weren't sure which way they wanted to go. We moved into a shallow valley, where the trees thickened and the air felt heavier. I remember smelling damp earth and something like metal, faint but sharp. It wasn't blood. I know that smell. This was more like iron, but stale. Old. It didn't make sense. I didn't say anything. I kept walking. That's when the light hit us. It wasn't like a flashlight. It wasn't like a car's headlights either. It didn't beam through the trees. It just appeared. All around us. A glow. White-blue. No source. No direction. It was just there, hanging in the air like fog, but brighter and more solid. I blinked hard and rubbed my eyes, but it didn't change. It wasn't coming from above or the sides. It was like the air itself was lit up. And then the noise came. It didn't start soft. It hit all at once. A deep, low rumble, not quite like thunder, but it felt like it came from inside the ground and inside my chest at the same time. It vibrated through my boots, made my jaw ache, made my stomach turn. And over that deep rumble was a high-pitched sound that wasn't quite a whistle and wasn't quite a scream. It shifted, like it was moving through different frequencies. My ears hurt instantly. I turned to look at the dogs. Both of them were on the ground. Not crouched, not watching, flat on their bellies, heads down, ears back, whimpering. I'd never seen Ruger like that. That dog once got into it with a full-grown boar and didn't make a sound. But here he was, whining like a pup, eyes wide and legs shaking. My uncle was behind me, but I didn't look at him. I couldn't take my eyes off the fog. It rolled in so fast it didn't even seem possible. 1 second, we were standing in clean, cold air, and the next, we were in a thick white soup. I could barely see the trees 5 feet in front of me. I could barely see my hands. My breath mixed with it like it was smoke. And then everything stopped. The light blinked out like someone hit a switch. The sound died so fast it made my ears ring. The fog didn't drift away. It just vanished. 1 second it was there. The next it wasn't. Just gone. We stood in pitch black, the real night around us again. My chest was tight. I couldn't feel my hands for a second. The dogs were still on the ground, shaking. I turned on my flashlight and looked at them. Their eyes didn't look right, wide, panicked, not like they usually were. It wasn't something they saw. It was something they felt. And that made it worse somehow. I finally looked at my uncle. He had his flashlight on too. His face was pale, even in the yellow beam of his light. He looked like he'd been holding his breath. I realized I had been too. We just stood there. Neither of us moved for what felt like minutes. I was frozen. Not from fear, exactly, but from not understanding. Nothing made sense. No light source. No fog source. No explanation. Eventually, we got the dogs up. They didn't want to move at first. Belle kept whining and trying to press into my legs. Ruger stayed low, tail between his legs. We decided to head back to the truck. There wasn't any discussion. It was just a silent understanding. This hunt was over. The walk back felt like it took hours. Every branch cracking under our boots made my stomach jump. Every shadow looked darker than it should. The woods felt different, like something had passed through them and changed them. It wasn't colder, but I shivered the whole way. When we got back to the truck, the dogs jumped in without being told. Normally, we had to lift Belle in. She was picky about the tailgate. Not that night. She scrambled in so fast she knocked over a box of gear. My uncle didn't say a word. We just got in and drove. He didn't turn on the radio. Just the low hum of the tires on gravel and the occasional thump of a pothole. I looked out the window the whole way back. I didn't want to look at him. I didn't want to see if he looked scared too. Back at the house, he walked inside and poured himself a cup of black coffee. I sat at the table. The dogs stayed close, right under our legs. My aunt came in and asked how the hunt went. He just said, "Nothing treed." That was it. Then he went outside to smoke. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about the light, the noise, the way the fog just took over and disappeared. I knew what I saw. I knew what I felt. And I knew it wasn't something normal. But it also wasn't something I could name. It wasn't a ghost or anything from a storybook. It was something real, physical, but completely unfamiliar. I told a friend about it years later. He said it might have been infrasound, low-frequency sound that messes with your body, makes you scared, disoriented. He said the fog could have been natural, maybe a sudden shift in temperature. But I've seen fog roll in. It doesn't just appear and vanish. And the light. I still can't explain that. Not the way it was everywhere, like the trees themselves were glowing. The dogs were never the same after that. Ruger started staying closer to the porch. Belle wouldn't go into the woods alone anymore. My uncle kept hunting, but he never went back to that part of the forest. Not once. He didn't say why. He didn't need to. I never went coon hunting again after that. Not because I was afraid, exactly, but because I didn't want to feel that again. That helplessness. That sense that something bigger than us had brushed past and decided to leave us alive. I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know the dogs felt it too. That's what stays with me the most. Those red bones weren't scared of anything I'd ever seen. But that night, they were broken down, crying on the ground. That wasn't in my head. That wasn't imagination. That was real. I still think about it sometimes, especially when the night's quiet and the wind dies and everything just goes still. That memory creeps back in, not with fear anymore, but with a question I'll never get answered. What the hell did we walk into out there? Whatever it was, it didn't want to be seen. Or maybe it did, just for a moment. Maybe it wanted us to know that we weren't the only ones in those woods. And maybe, just maybe, it let us go. It started out like any other rainy day, the kind where the sky already looks bruised even before the first drop falls. The clouds hung low, heavy and swollen, with the kind of weight that makes the whole day feel like it's dragging. My brother and I were in the truck with my dad, heading down the narrow back road that wound through the trees behind our house. It was a road we'd driven 1,000 times before. It was cracked in places, had deep ruts along the sides where runoff carved lines into the dirt, and it always smelled like damp pine and wet leaves. It wasn't even really a road, more like a long driveway that cut across a few acres of wooded land before finally linking up with the main road a couple miles away. I can't even remember why we were going out. It might have been to check the mail at the end of the road, or maybe to head into town for something. Milk, maybe, or gas. What I do remember, though, as clear as the sky was dark, was how bad the storm was. It started out rough and only got worse. At first it was just fat raindrops pounding on the windshield like thrown pebbles, but then the sky opened up and let it all go at once. The wipers were already on full speed, but they barely kept up. The rain hit so hard and fast that it was like driving through a gray curtain, and then the hail joined in, tiny white chunks bouncing off the hood and roof and smacking the side windows. It was loud. You had to squint just to make out the lines in the road. The tires made that wet hissing sound on the pavement, and every now and then the whole truck would shudder when a big gust of wind pushed against us. I remember looking out the passenger window, just watching how fast the trees blurred past in the sheets of rain, how the branches swayed like they were being yanked around by something. My brother was quiet in the back seat, probably watching the same thing. I think we were all kind of quiet. The storm had that effect. It was so bad that it made even my dad grip the wheel with both hands and lean in a little more than usual, his eyes narrowed. We were about halfway down the road, maybe a mile from the house, when I saw him. At first it didn't even register as a person. It was just a bright spot in the rain, something yellow that didn't belong there. It stood out sharp against the dull gray of everything else. A yellow rain slicker. The kind that looks shiny and stiff, like something you'd see in old fisherman pictures. It was walking, slow and steady, right along the edge of the road on our side, coming toward us in the opposite direction. I leaned forward without even thinking, trying to get a better look through the blur of the windshield. The hood was up, covering the head completely, but it was tipped down just enough that you couldn't see the face at all. No features, no eyes, no mouth, just the dark space under that hood. The rain bounced off the fabric in thick drops, sliding down the arms and back, the way water runs off a tarp. His hands were tucked into the sleeves, and he wasn't carrying anything, just walking, not even hurrying, despite the downpour. Something about the way he moved made my stomach clench. He didn't look right. He was moving too slow, like he wasn't affected by the storm at all, like he wasn't even wet. The water just seemed to roll off him, like he wasn't real. But he was real. I kept telling myself that. He had weight, footsteps. He was walking like any other person, putting one foot in front of the other. But he didn't look up. Not once. Just kept his head down and walked. We were going about 30, maybe a little slower because of the conditions. The road wasn't wide. On a normal day, we would have waved to someone walking by, or maybe my dad would have rolled down the window to ask if they needed a ride. But not this time. This time no one said anything. We all saw him. None of us spoke. It was like we all felt it at once, that this wasn't normal. As we got closer, maybe 30 yards out, the man in the yellow slicker suddenly stopped. Just stopped dead, like a statue. Still didn't look up. Just froze there. My eyes flicked to my dad, but he didn't change speed. He just kept driving, hands tight on the wheel, staring forward like he was trying to will the guy to move. But he didn't. Then, just as we were about to pass him, maybe 10 feet out, if that, the man sidestepped. He didn't stumble. He didn't flinch. He stepped. One big, deliberate step right into the road, right into our path. It happened so fast, but it felt like time stretched out. I saw the side of the yellow slicker, the way the hood bobbed slightly with the movement. His foot planted hard on the wet asphalt. For 1 second, I thought he was going to throw himself in front of the truck. My dad swerved hard to the left, just a small jerk of the wheel, but it was enough. The tires caught the edge of the road, one of them kicking up a spray of gravel and water. The truck slid a little, but my dad caught it, straightened it out. We didn't spin or fishtail. It was controlled, but close. Real close. I felt the side mirror was past something, maybe a foot, maybe a coat. I don't know how we didn't hit him. And then he was behind us. Just like that, we were past him. My heart was slamming in my chest, and I turned in my seat, looking back through the rain-smeared rear window. He was still walking, just walking, like nothing happened. Same slow pace, same bowed head. The rain still pounding down, still soaking everything around him. He didn't look after us. He didn't run. He didn't even stop. Just picked up where he left off, like it was all normal. Like stepping into a moving truck was just part of his day. We kept driving. None of us said a word. My dad stared straight ahead. My brother leaned forward between the seats, staring back over my shoulder. No one moved. It wasn't until we were halfway to the end of the road that I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. There was something surreal about the whole thing. The kind of moment that doesn't quite settle right in your head. Like your brain doesn't know where to file it. The storm didn't stop. The hail kept coming, but I wasn't paying attention anymore. I just kept thinking about that yellow raincoat and how the guy moved. The way he just stepped into our path like he knew exactly what he was doing. Like he wanted to be hit, or maybe just wanted to scare the hell out of someone. But it didn't feel like a prank. It didn't feel like a drunk guy or a dare. It felt like something else, something wrong. We didn't talk about it when we got back. Not really. My dad said something about idiots walking in the storm, then went quiet again. My brother shook his head and went to his room. I sat in the kitchen for a while, just watching the rain roll down the window. But I kept thinking about it. A couple days later, I went back down the road on my bike just to see. The sky was clear by then, everything bright and dry. The storm had blown through, and it looked like any other summer day. I rode slow, watching the trees, scanning the edges of the road for anything, footprints, trash, anything yellow. There was nothing. No sign that anyone had ever been there. No one else in town mentioned seeing a man in a raincoat, and I didn't see anyone walking out there again. It just ended. I've thought about that day a lot since then. I think about how close we were to hitting him. I think about what would have happened if we had. I think about how calm he looked, how purposeful. He didn't try to stop us or wave us down. He just waited and stepped. That image stays with me, more than anything. The bright yellow slicker, soaked and heavy, and that head tilted just enough so you couldn't see a face. No expression, no recognition. Just a person-shaped question mark in the middle of a storm. I don't know who he was. I don't know why he did it. Maybe it was a mental breakdown. Maybe it was a dare gone too far. Or maybe he just wanted to feel something, even if it was the rush of almost dying. Whatever it was, it worked. Because I still see him sometimes, not in real life, but in my mind. When it rains like that again, when the wind picks up and the sky goes black, I can't help but look up the road, half expecting to see him again. Just walking. And if I ever do, I don't think I'll stop the car. I hadn't seen my cousin Evan in years. Not since we were kids running around barefoot in our grandparents' yard, chasing chickens and getting yelled at for climbing the old pecan tree near the barn. Life happened, as it always does, and we drifted apart, different cities, different lives. But when he called me out of the blue that summer, asking if I wanted to join him on a weekend trip to the mountains, I said yes without thinking too hard about it. We planned a short hiking and camping trip in a less traveled area of the Appalachians, about a 4-hour drive from where I lived. Evan had done a lot of hiking over the years, more than me honestly, and promised that it wouldn't be anything too intense. Just a couple of days out in the woods, fresh air, no phones, maybe some fishing if we could find a stream. I packed light, mostly secondhand gear I borrowed from a buddy who used to do trail work, tossed it all in the back of my car, and met Evan at a gas station off the highway on a Friday morning. He had a big beard now, almost unrecognizable except for that familiar smirk he always had when we were kids. We talked for a while at the pumps, loading his pack into my trunk, swapping old memories, laughing like no time had passed. Then we drove. The route to the trailhead took us down a two-lane road that twisted through hills and dense forest. As we got further from town, the signs of civilization dropped off quickly. No more gas stations, no houses, just trees pressing in on both sides of the road. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, but that heavy, almost unnatural silence you feel when there's nothing around but land and air. I didn't mention it to Evan. He seemed relaxed, staring out the window like he was already deep in the trip. We reached the trailhead just after noon. It was nothing more than a wide dirt patch off the road, no signs, no cars. I checked my phone one last time, no signal. Evan said that was normal out here. We pulled on our packs, locked the car, and stepped onto the narrow trail that disappeared into the trees. The first few hours were good. The trail was steep in places but manageable. Ferns covered the forest floor, and everything smelled like wet moss and pine. We passed a couple of streams, climbed over some fallen logs, and even saw a deer bounding off into the distance at one point. The sun filtered through the leaves above us, painting patches of light that moved as the wind blew through the branches. I remember thinking it was exactly what I needed. No noise, no emails, no stress, just the woods and the sound of boots on dirt. We hiked for about 5 miles before Evan suggested we stop for the night. There was a small clearing just off the trail, barely visible unless you knew where to look. It was flat, dry, and surrounded by thick trees. We set up camp there, pitched our small tents facing each other, and built a fire with what Evan gathered nearby. As the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, the temperature dropped fast, and I was glad I'd brought my thermal layer. We ate a simple dinner, beans, jerky, and trail mix, and sat by the fire until the stars came out. It got real dark real quick. Out there, miles from the nearest town, the sky looked different. Bigger, I guess. Like you were sitting at the bottom of a well looking up. The fire cracked and popped, and the forest creaked and rustled. And for a long time we just sat in silence, soaking it all in. I went to bed before Evan did. He said he wanted to stare at the stars a little longer. I crawled into my tent, zipped up the flap, and curled into my sleeping bag. I fell asleep to the sound of leaves rustling in the wind and the occasional snap of a branch out in the dark. I woke up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, eyes wide open. I didn't know why at first. No dreams, no sounds. I just suddenly snapped awake, like my body had felt something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. I lay there listening. Nothing. Then I heard it. A soft, steady crunching sound, like footsteps on dry leaves. Not fast, not panicked. Slow, deliberate, moving through the woods just outside the clearing. I didn't move. I held my breath. Crunch, crunch, pause. Crunch, crunch. It wasn't an animal. I've heard deer move through the woods before. They walked differently, lighter, more erratic. This was different. This was careful. I slowly unzipped my sleeping bag and reached for my flashlight, but I didn't turn it on. I didn't want to give away that I was awake. The steps circled the clearing once, then stopped for a long time. I didn't hear them again after that. I waited at least an hour, maybe more, before I fell asleep again. In the morning, Evan asked if I'd heard the raccoon. I said no. He said he thought something was moving around camp, but figured it was nothing. I didn't say anything. We packed up and kept hiking. The trail climbed higher after that. We passed through dense thickets where the light barely touched the ground, then up onto a narrow ridge with a view of the valley below. There were no signs, no markers, just Evan's memory guiding us. He said he'd been here once before, years ago, and that there was a good spot to camp near a small creek just a few miles further. We reached it by late afternoon. It was even more remote than the first site. No clearing this time, just a flat spot near the creek where the trees opened up enough to pitch our tents. The air smelled clean, cold. The only sound was the water rushing over smooth rocks. We set up camp again, made another small fire, and sat quietly as the sun went down. I kept glancing into the trees, feeling uneasy. Not scared, exactly. Just off. Like the air was too still, or the woods too quiet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening, waiting, heart pounding every time I heard a twig snap or leaves crunch. Around midnight, I heard it again, the same slow, steady footsteps. This time closer. They moved through the trees behind Evan's tent. I could hear them crunching through the underbrush, then stopping. Then a soft thump, like someone shifting their weight. Then nothing. I gripped my flashlight, but didn't turn it on. I waited, barely breathing. Eventually, the steps faded. I lay there, stiff as stone, until the sky turned gray with morning light. When we got up, Evan looked tired too. I could tell he hadn't slept well, but he didn't say anything about it. I asked if he heard anything, and he just shrugged, said maybe it was a fox. I knew it wasn't a fox. We decided to keep moving that day, get to a higher point on the ridge, and start circling back toward the trailhead. The hike was harder than the day before, steeper, rougher, less clear where the trail was. At times, it felt like we weren't even on a trail anymore, just weaving through the woods by instinct. Around midday, Evan stopped and looked down at something in the dirt. A boot print. Not his. Not mine. Too large. Deeper than ours. Fresh. He looked at me, then back at the print. Neither of us said anything. We kept moving. From that point on, I felt like we were being watched. It sounds cliché, but it's true. You know that feeling when someone's staring at you, even if you can't see them? That crawling tension at the back of your neck? That's what I felt. Every step. Every minute. The woods got denser, the trail even harder to follow. We kept climbing, hoping to find a good overlook where we could stop and get our bearings. But we never found one. Just more trees, more moss-covered rocks, more silence. By late afternoon, we decided to stop and set up camp early. We found a narrow gully between two slopes, sheltered by thick pines. Not ideal, but it would do. As we set up camp, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A tree nearby had bark stripped off in long, vertical claw marks. They were old, but deep. Too deep for a black bear. I didn't say anything. That night, we didn't make a fire. We ate cold food, stayed in our tents. Neither of us talked much. I lay in my tent, eyes open, flashlight in hand. Then I heard it. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. Not close. Not far. Just steady, rhythmic breathing. Like someone standing still, somewhere out in the trees. I couldn't tell the direction. It echoed weirdly in the gully. I stayed like that all night. I didn't sleep at all. When the sun finally came up, I unzipped my tent and looked around. Nothing. No footprints. No sign of anything. But Evan was already packed. He looked at me and nodded. I nodded back. We didn't speak. We just started hiking. That last day was a blur. Constant movement. No breaks. Barely drinking water. Just pushing forward, fast as we could, trying to get back to the car. The woods seemed thicker, darker, more twisted. Every branch looked like a hand reaching out. Every rustle made my heart jump. Late in the afternoon, we finally reached the trailhead. The car was still there. Everything looked normal, but something was different. A fresh scrape ran down the driver's side door, deep, jagged, like someone had dragged a sharp object along it. We loaded our gear in silence, climbed in, and drove. Evan didn't say a word the whole ride back. I didn't either. When we got to the gas station where we'd met, he got out without saying goodbye. Just grabbed his pack and walked off. I never saw him again. I tried calling later. No answer. I texted. Nothing. I don't know what was out there. Person, animal, whatever. But it followed us. Watched us. Moved around our camp every night, just out of sight. And it knew exactly what it was doing. It didn't want to scare us away. It wanted us to know it was there. To remember. I took a week off work in late October. I needed to get away from everything. People, noise, the screens, the non-stop emails. I didn't tell anyone much about my plans, except that I'd be hiking for a few days. I picked a trail system in the northern part of the state, one I'd heard about from a ranger the year before, but never had the time to check out. It wasn't a national park, so it didn't attract too many tourists. That's what I wanted. Quiet. Time. Nature. I packed my gear carefully. 2.5 days worth of food, a water filtration kit, GPS, paper maps, compass, survival kit, emergency whistle, flare, and a small 2-person tent just in case I didn't make it to a shelter. I kept my phone with me too, though I knew there wouldn't be service for most of it. That was part of the appeal. The drive up took 5 hours. By the time I parked at the dirt pull-off by the trailhead, it was late afternoon, gray and cool. I remember stepping out of the car and taking a long breath. Pine, damp leaves, the quiet kind of cold that tells you winter's not far off. I strapped my pack on and headed into the woods. The trail started easy. Just soft dirt, scattered rocks, and a slow incline. Trees on both sides, spaced wide enough to see between them, but close enough that it felt like a tunnel. I hiked for maybe 2 hours before I set up camp at a clearing just off the path. There was an old fire ring there, blackened stones with ash in the middle, probably from summer hikers. That first night was calm. I cooked rice and beans over my little stove and sat on a log with my headlamp off, watching the last light bleed from the sky. I slept well. The air was cold, but the sleeping bag kept me warm. In the middle of the night, I heard something walking near the tent, just soft footsteps through leaves, probably a raccoon or deer. I didn't move. I listened until it passed, and then fell back asleep. The next day, I hiked further. According to my map, there was a loop that would take me around a large ridge and past an old fire tower. The trail wasn't very well marked. Sometimes the path was barely visible under fallen leaves. I had to keep checking the GPS to make sure I hadn't wandered off. Around mid-afternoon, clouds rolled in. I could feel a storm coming. I sped up, trying to reach the tower before rain hit. The path got steeper and rockier. By the time I made it to the top, I was drenched in sweat, even though the temperature had dropped. The fire tower was still standing, though old and rusted. The bottom steps were broken, so I didn't bother climbing it. I took shelter under the base and pulled out a protein bar. I remember the quiet again. Just wind through the trees, the distant rumble of thunder. No birds, no insects. That kind of quiet is different. It feels like the forest is holding its breath. I checked my GPS again and noticed the signal was flickering. The weather, maybe. I marked my position anyway and decided to start the descent. I figured I'd make camp at a creek I'd seen on the map, about 2 miles down. As I headed down, the trail grew rougher. Sections were washed out from old storms. Some parts were nothing but loose stones and slick mud. I lost my footing once and slid a few feet before catching myself on a root. I kept going, slower now, more careful. It started to rain just before I reached the creek. Not heavy at first, just a cold drizzle that seeped into everything. I found a flat spot near the water, set up my tent, and got a fire going with dry twigs I kept wrapped in a plastic bag. I boiled water, made tea, and sat under my poncho, watching the rain fall into the creek. That night was different. I didn't sleep well. The wind picked up, rattling the tent. The rain got heavier. Branches snapped in the woods. At some point, I thought I heard something moving near the tent again. Slow, crunching steps. I held my breath. It didn't sound like a deer. Too heavy. It passed eventually, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me. The next morning, I found tracks in the mud a few yards from the tent. Not boot prints. Not paws either. Hooves. Big ones. Could have been a moose, but the prints were too round, too wide. I didn't think too hard about it. Just packed up and moved on. I decided to finish the loop early and head back to the car. The sky was still gray, and I didn't trust the weather. I checked the map, took a bearing with the compass, and started walking. The trail was supposed to fork after about a mile and reconnect near a logging road. I never found the fork. I walked for hours. The GPS wouldn't load, just a frozen screen. I kept going in the direction I thought was right, using the compass and the sun when I could see it. But the forest didn't look familiar anymore. The trees were thicker. The underbrush was tangled and wild. I hadn't seen a trail marker in a long time. I told myself I wasn't lost, just temporarily off course. I'd find the road or the trail eventually. I rationed water, skipped lunch to conserve food, and kept moving. The light started fading around 5 p.m. I decided to make camp again, figuring I'd find the road in the morning. That night was bad. No rain, but the wind was stronger. It howled through the trees like distant voices. The tent shook. I kept hearing things, snapping twigs, rustling leaves, heavy steps that stopped and started again. I didn't sleep. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling of the tent, gripping the emergency whistle in one hand and my knife in the other. I thought about using the flare, but I didn't want to waste it unless I was in real trouble. By morning, I knew I was lost. The GPS was dead now. Wouldn't even turn on. My phone was too, battery drained even though I'd barely used it. I tried to retrace my steps, but the forest all looked the same. Brown trunks, wet leaves, mist hanging low. Every direction felt like the wrong one. I walked all day without finding a trail or road, just endless trees. I called out once or twice, just to break the silence. My voice sounded small and stupid out there. Nothing answered. I set up camp again that night, this time near a fallen log that gave some shelter from the wind. I built a small fire, more for comfort than warmth. I ate the last of my food, a handful of nuts and a granola bar. I sat with my back to the log and watched the fire burn down. Just before dark, I heard something again. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. It was faint at first, then closer. Deep, steady breaths, like something standing just behind the trees, just outside the reach of the firelight. I didn't move. I didn't even turn around. I sat frozen, listening. The breathing went on for maybe a minute. Then it stopped. Nothing. Just the crackle of dying embers and the wind. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard it again. That slow, heavy breathing. I kept the knife in my hand and the flare ready. But nothing came into the camp. Morning came, gray and cold, and I packed up and walked again. I don't know how many days I was lost. I stopped counting. I ran out of food. My legs were weak. My lips were cracked. I started hallucinating sometimes, thinking I saw people between the trees, flashes of color, scraps of old tents. Once I thought I saw a ranger station, walked straight toward it, only to find a pile of rocks shaped like a hut. I knew I'd die out there if I didn't do something, so I climbed. I found the highest ridge I could and scrambled up it, hoping I'd see something. A road, a house, anything. It took all day. I tore my hands on rocks and slipped in mud, but I reached the top before sunset, and I saw smoke. Faint, thin, but definitely there. A straight column rising above the trees, maybe a few miles north. I scrambled down, half running, falling through brush. I didn't care anymore. I just ran toward that smoke. It took me all night. I fell into a creek, lost my footing, cut my leg open on a sharp rock. I kept going, limping now, dragging my pack. I tore it off and left it behind. Just after dawn, I found a logging road, a dirt track with deep tire ruts and old footprints. I followed it, limping, bleeding, hungry. After a mile, I found a small cabin, just a shack really, with smoke curling from a stovepipe. I banged on the door until a man opened it, wide-eyed and confused. I couldn't even talk. I just collapsed. They took me to a hospital in the nearest town. I was dehydrated, malnourished, and had an infected cut on my leg. I stayed there for 4 days. They asked how I got so lost. I couldn't explain it. I had a map, a compass, a GPS. I'd done dozens of hikes before. I knew how to stay oriented. But somehow, I'd gotten completely turned around. Something had pulled me off the trail. Or maybe I'd just gotten careless. I don't know. They found my gear weeks later. My tent shredded by wind. My pack soaked and half buried in mud. But what I remember most was the tracks around the camp. Not boot prints. Not paws. Hoofs. Big, round, wide ones. The ranger said there were no cattle up there, no horses, no moose that far south. He didn't know what made them. I didn't argue. I don't hike alone anymore. I never thought a simple detour on the drive back home would lead to one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. I had just spent a weekend visiting an old college buddy in upstate Pennsylvania, and instead of taking the main interstate back like I always did, I decided to take the scenic route through the Allegheny backroads. I wasn't in a rush. I liked long drives and I liked quiet, especially after 2 days of loud friends and late-night beers. It was early evening when I turned off the highway and started cutting through the wooded countryside. The sky was still light, but starting to fade into that pale blue that comes before dusk. My GPS had me on a narrow, two-lane road with no dividing lines, cracked edges, and barely enough shoulder to pull over if I needed to. It twisted through thick forests and small hills, and I passed a few farms spaced out by miles. Cell signal was spotty, but I didn't think much of it. I had offline maps downloaded and a full tank of gas. Somewhere along that road, the GPS glitched. It froze and then rerouted me. I didn't notice right away, but after about 15 minutes, I realized I was no longer on the planned route. It had sent me onto a smaller side road called Copper Hollow Road. The name didn't ring any bells, but I figured it was just a shortcut. Sometimes Google Maps did that when it thought it found a faster route. The road got narrower. The pavement turned to gravel. Then the gravel gave way to dirt and rocks, the kind of road you usually need a truck or SUV for. I was in my old but reliable Camry, which had never had trouble before, so I kept going. I told myself I could always turn around if things got worse, but I kept putting off the decision, thinking the road would open back up soon. It never did. The trees got thicker. The light dimmed quickly. It was midsummer, but in that part of the woods, it looked like evening had arrived early. There were no power lines, no mailboxes, no signs of houses or life. Just trees and dirt and shadows. Eventually, I reached a point where the road dipped down into a small valley. The path there was covered in mud and had clearly been washed out by recent rain. I stopped the car and looked ahead. The wheels were already slipping a bit. I knew if I went further and got stuck, there'd be no one to help. There was no cell service. No one would hear me call. I decided to back up. When I shifted into reverse and looked behind me, I realized I couldn't easily turn around. The road was too narrow and lined with thick trees on either side. I'd have to reverse all the way back up the hill, which curved sharply to the left. I sighed and started inching back slowly, carefully trying not to veer off into the woods. That's when my rear will hit something and spun out. I cursed under my breath and got out. My right rear tire had sunk into a soft patch of ground where water had pooled. It wasn't a deep hole, but it was enough to trap the wheel. I tried putting branches and rocks under it to get traction. It didn't help. Every time I tried to reverse, the tire spun and kicked up more mud. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the road. I tried walking up the hill a bit to see if I could get a better view, or maybe some signal. Nothing. The trees were too thick. The canopy blocked any light from the fading sky. I walked back to the car and sat for a minute thinking. I didn't want to leave the vehicle, but I also couldn't stay put all night in the middle of nowhere. I remembered passing a small dirt driveway about a mile back. I wasn't sure if it led to a house or was just a logging path, but I figured it was better than nothing. I locked the car and started walking. The woods were completely silent except for the crunch of my shoes on gravel. No birds, no insects. That kind of silence that isn't peaceful, it's heavy. I kept glancing into the trees, half expecting to see something move. I didn't, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. I told myself it was just nerves, just the isolation playing tricks on me. After about 20 minutes of walking, I saw the entrance to that dirt path. I took it. It curved through more trees and disappeared into the forest. I followed it, hoping it would lead to a house or cabin. The deeper I went, the more overgrown the path became. It didn't look like it had been used in months. Weeds grew tall in the middle, and branches reached low from either side. The sky above was now a dim grayish blue, barely visible through the trees. Then I saw a structure up ahead. It was an old house, not completely abandoned, but not well kept either. The porch sagged in the middle, and the paint was peeling. A rusted pickup truck sat off to the side, half covered in a blue tarp. There were no lights on, no movement, but smoke trickled faintly from a metal chimney pipe sticking out of the roof. That meant someone might be home. I walked slowly up the path toward the house. I hesitated at the bottom of the porch steps. Something about the place felt off. It wasn't just the condition. It was the stillness. The kind of stillness that felt forced, like it was holding its breath. But I needed help. I stepped up onto the porch, and it creaked loudly under my weight. I froze, half expecting someone to yell from inside. Nothing. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I waited another minute, then walked around the side of the house. There was a small shed in the back, door slightly ajar. I peeked inside. Empty. Just old tools, rusted cans, and a couple of stacked buckets. I walked back toward the front. Then I saw the footprints. They were in the dirt by the porch. Fresh. Still defined. They weren't boot prints or sneakers. Bare feet. Adult-sized. Several of them. Some pointing toward the woods, others back toward the house. They weren't evenly spaced either. Some were staggered or overlapping, like someone had been pacing or stumbling. I looked around again, more alert now. Still no sound. No birds. No wind. I decided not to wait around. I turned and started walking back toward the road. I figured if I could get far enough away from this place, I might find another road, or maybe catch a bar of signal. That's when I heard the sound behind me. A soft thud, then another, like someone stepping on dry ground barefoot. I froze. I didn't turn around right away. I just listened. Thud, thud. It was coming closer. I started walking faster. My heart thudded louder than the footsteps behind me. I didn't want to run, not yet, but I picked up the pace. The sound behind me grew quicker, matching my steps. I finally turned. Nothing. The path was empty behind me. No movement. No one. I stared for a long second, breathing hard, eyes scanning the trees. I started walking again, this time faster. Every few seconds I glanced back. Still nothing. But the feeling that something was near never left. I broke into a light jog, not caring how loud I was. I needed to get out of those woods. When I reached the main dirt road again, I felt a wave of relief. My car was still about a mile down the hill, but at least I was away from that house. I took a deep breath, wiped sweat from my forehead, and kept walking. That's when I noticed something strange about the road. There were new footprints. Barefoot. Same as before. Only now they were behind me, spaced perfectly in the middle of the road, leading back the way I had come. Like someone had been following at a distance the whole time. I didn't stop to think. I ran. Full sprint. I didn't look back again. I just ran until I saw the faint silver glint of my car through the trees. When I reached it, I fumbled with the keys, yanked the door open, and slammed it shut behind me. I locked the doors, sat there panting, staring out the windshield into the trees. The forest was dark now, almost black. I didn't see anyone, but I felt something, a presence, just out of view. I sat in the car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel. I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't drive forward. The road was impassable. I couldn't reverse. The tire was stuck. I considered sleeping there until morning, but I didn't feel safe staying still. Eventually, I got out again and circled to the back. I took more branches, more rocks, tried again to get the tire free. On the fourth try, the car lurched back an inch, then another. I floored it in reverse and felt the back end rise out of the hole. The car spun sideways a bit, but I got it straight and kept going, reversing up the hill as fast as I could without skidding off the edge. I didn't stop until I was back on gravel. From there, I kept driving until I saw the glow of headlights, an old pickup coming toward me on the main road. I waved it down. It was a local man who lived a few miles away. He helped me get turned around and told me that Copper Hollow wasn't on any current map. The house at the end of the path had been abandoned for years. No one lived there. Not anymore. I didn't say anything. I didn't mention the footprints, or the sound of footsteps, or the feeling that something had followed me. I thanked him, turned back toward the highway, and didn't stop again until I was home. I never found out who or what had been in those woods with me. Maybe it was some old hermit, someone squatting in that house, or maybe something worse. I don't need to know. I've never taken a detour since. And every time I see a dirt road winding into the forest, I keep driving. I've always been an early riser, and I usually spent my weekends going out for long solo hikes. I never really liked gyms or crowded trails. I preferred the silence and the slow rhythm of my own steps crunching dirt and leaves underfoot. I wasn't an adrenaline junkie, and I never did anything risky. I just liked being away from people for a bit, walking through the woods with a small backpack, a thermos of coffee, and my thoughts. One Saturday morning in late October, I decided to explore a trail I'd heard about from a coworker. It wasn't official, not on any map, but he said he used to hike it years ago. Said it cut through a patch of thick woods near an old logging site that had been abandoned for decades. It wasn't too far, just a few miles out of town, and from the way he described it, it sounded quiet, barely touched, the kind of place that hadn't seen human footsteps in years. That was exactly what I was looking for. I woke up around 5 a.m., threw on my usual hiking clothes, base layer, light jacket, jeans, and boots. The air was cold enough to fog my breath when I stepped out to load my bag in the car. I had packed light: water, a sandwich, flashlight, small first aid kit, knife, thermos of coffee, and a printed satellite map with some scribbled notes on the area my coworker had mentioned. I also had my phone fully charged, but I already knew reception would be useless out there. The trailhead wasn't really a trailhead. I parked on the shoulder of a narrow two-lane road, next to a rusted metal gate that led into what used to be a dirt road. The gate was locked and half covered in vines, so I hopped it and started walking, following the old roadbed as it curved through dry grass and sparse trees. It was quiet, still, just birdsong and the occasional creaking branch. As I got deeper, the trees got denser. The path narrowed and eventually faded into scattered leaves and moss, but I kept moving in the direction I had marked on the map. The forest here had a strange feel to it, not exactly ominous, but forgotten. Everything was overgrown, tangled. Broken fence posts and rotting boards poked out from the underbrush in places, probably leftovers from the old logging camp. About an hour in, I found what looked like a clearing. It was small and uneven, with some sun filtering through the branches overhead. There were a few stumps, a rusted wheelbarrow half buried in dirt, and a stack of logs long turned to spongy mulch. I took a short break there, sat on a stump, and sipped some coffee. I hadn't seen or heard anything unusual so far. If anything, the silence was what stood out. No planes overhead, no distant traffic. Even the birds had gone quiet. I kept going past the clearing, now relying more on the general direction than any real path. That's when the terrain started getting tricky. The land sloped downward, more steeply than I expected, and the soil was loose with leaves and slick patches of moss. I took my time, stepping carefully, grabbing onto branches and tree trunks to steady myself. At the bottom of the slope, the forest floor flattened out into a low basin, like a shallow bowl. That's where I noticed the smell. It wasn't strong at first, just a faint sourness in the air. I figured maybe a dead animal was nearby. It's not uncommon in the woods. I moved slower, keeping my eyes open for any carcass, both out of curiosity and caution. I didn't want to stumble onto a bear's kill or something. But there were no signs of struggle, no drag marks or prints in the mud. Just the smell, getting slightly stronger the further I walked. Then I saw the structure. It was maybe 60 or 70 feet ahead, partially hidden behind a thicket of saplings and hanging vines. It looked like a shack. Old. Very old. The roof was caved in on one side, and the wooden planks were gray and warped with age. I hadn't expected anything like this, but given the history of the area, maybe it was part of the old logging camp. Still, something about it put me on edge. I paused for a while, just standing there, half crouched behind a tree, watching the shack like it might move. It didn't. Nothing did. I didn't even hear wind. Eventually I stepped closer. My boots made almost no sound on the damp ground. I wasn't trying to sneak, but I also wasn't walking boldly. Just slow, careful steps. The smell was worse now, thick and cloying, like rot mixed with mildew. I reached the shack and peered through a crack in the wall. It was dark inside, barely lit by the gray daylight leaking through the collapsed roof. I couldn't see much, just some broken beams, piles of debris, and something else. At first, I thought it was a bundle of old tarps or blankets. Then I realized it had a shape to it. Rounded, lumpy, too large to be a deer. My breath caught in my throat, and for the first time all morning, I felt real fear. I didn't want to look closer. I didn't want to open that door or find a better angle. But I also didn't want to walk away without knowing what the hell I'd just seen. I circled to the front of the shack, where the door hung open, twisted off one hinge. I took one step inside. The boards creaked beneath me but held. I could see better now, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The bundle was a body. It was human. Male, maybe in his 40s or 50s. He was on his side, curled up slightly, knees bent toward his chest. His skin was grayish, mottled, clothes shredded and dirt-caked. No visible blood, no obvious wounds. But his eyes were open, wide open, and his mouth too, like he'd frozen mid-scream. I stumbled back, out of the shack, almost tripping over the threshold. My heart was pounding now, my breath coming fast. I tried to make sense of what I'd seen. Was he a hiker? Someone who got lost. But his clothes didn't look new. They were old, like from another decade. Layers of wool and denim, not the kind of modern outdoor gear people wore now. I turned to leave. I didn't want to be there anymore. I didn't care if I missed part of the trail, or if I had to bushwhack back to the car. I just wanted out. That's when I heard it. A snap, like a footstep on a dry branch. I froze. Every hair on my body stood up. I didn't turn around. I didn't breathe. I listened. Another sound, a low rustling, maybe 30 feet behind me, somewhere in the trees. I slowly reached into my bag, pulling out my knife. It was small, just a folding blade, but it was better than nothing. I didn't want to panic. Animals live out here. Maybe it was a deer, or even a bear. I just had to stay calm. Then I heard breathing. Not mine. Heavy, steady. From behind a cluster of trees. It wasn't panting. It was slow, deliberate, like someone trying to stay quiet, but unable to hide completely. I turned and backed away slowly, eyes scanning the woods. I couldn't see anything, but I knew something was there. Watching me. Following me. I didn't run. Not yet. I walked as fast as I could without making too much noise, back toward the slope I'd come down earlier. Every few seconds, I looked back. Nothing. No movement. But the feeling didn't go away. I reached the slope and started climbing. It was harder going up, my boots slipping on the loose dirt and wet leaves. My legs burned. My lungs ached. I gripped tree roots and low branches, pulling myself higher. Then I slipped. One boot lost traction, and I fell hard on my side, sliding a few feet before stopping against a log. Pain shot through my hip, but I pushed up fast, breathing hard, knife still clenched in my fist. When I looked back down the slope, I saw something move. A figure, standing still at the bottom, near the base of the trees. It wasn't clear, just a dark shape. No details, no face, but it was upright, human-shaped, and it was staring up at me. I didn't wait. I scrambled the rest of the way up, half running, half climbing, branches slapping my face. When I reached the top, I didn't stop. I just kept going, pushing through the brush, trying to retrace my steps toward the clearing. I moved fast, not caring how much noise I made now. Every few steps I looked back. Nothing. No one. But I didn't believe it was gone. I couldn't. That feeling of being hunted never left. Eventually I reached the clearing again. The sun had shifted, more shadows now. I was breathing hard, soaked in sweat despite the cold. I took a quick drink of water, then kept moving. The old road was ahead. If I could just reach it, I'd be close to the gate. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. The ground was marked. Tracks. Not boot prints. Drag marks. Like something heavy had been pulled through the leaves. Fresh. They led off the road and into the trees. I didn't follow them. I kept walking, faster now, legs stiff and sore lungs burning. When I reached the gate, I climbed it without stopping and practically ran to my car. Threw open the door, tossed my bag inside, and slammed it shut. I locked the doors. Then I sat there for a long time, hands gripping the wheel, staring at the woods. I didn't see anything follow me. I didn't hear anything more. But I knew someone was out there. Later, I tried to report what I'd found. I called the local sheriff's department and told them I found a body in an old shack. I didn't mention the figure. I didn't mention the tracks. They sent someone to check it out, but a few days later I got a call saying they couldn't locate any structure fitting my description. No shack. No body. Just dense woods. They said maybe I got turned around. Maybe I'd wandered onto private land. Maybe it was an old animal carcass I mistook for something else. I didn't argue. I thanked them and hung up. But I know what I saw, and I haven't gone hiking alone since. It started with a stupid idea. I was restless, tired of my routine, tired of the noise of the city, tired of people, and their constant need to talk and make everything louder than it needs to be. I had been thinking about getting away, alone, just to clear my head. Not for long, just a few days. I looked at some spots within a few hours' drive from home, and finally landed on an area I had read about once. Old mining land in northern Pennsylvania that had been long abandoned. The state had bought it up and declared it public game land. There were no trails, no campgrounds, nothing. Just deep woods, old hills, and silence. No one went there, and that was exactly why I chose it. I packed light. Just a tent, sleeping bag, a portable stove, a good knife, some dried food, a water filter, my compass, and a printed map. No GPS, no cell service in that region anyway. I told one person where I was going, my older brother. I said I'd be gone 4 days max. He didn't ask questions, just said to check in when I got back. The drive took me 6 hours. The last 30 miles were slow, winding roads, most of them poorly maintained. When I finally reached the spot where the dirt road ended, I parked my truck under the shadow of tall pine trees, locked it, slung my pack over my shoulder, and started walking. The air smelled like damp earth and pine needles. I didn't see another person, not a single soul. There weren't even any tire tracks where I parked, no litter, no signs of recent human activity. It was what I wanted. I walked in for nearly an hour before I found a decent spot to set up camp. A flat area near a narrow stream, surrounded by hardwood trees and ferns. I could hear birds and the occasional snap of a branch in the underbrush. Nothing felt threatening, just nature doing its thing. I set up the tent, got my sleeping bag arranged, and then sat on a nearby rock to eat a quick dinner. It was quiet, that kind of deep silence where you can hear your own breathing clearly. That first night was uneventful. The temperature dropped fast after sunset, but I was ready for that. I fell asleep with no problem, lulled by the sound of wind brushing through the leaves. The next day, I decided to explore. I didn't bring everything with me, just my knife, compass, water filter, and a day's worth of snacks. I followed the stream for a while, then veered off into denser forest. The terrain got rougher, with big rocks and thick underbrush. Occasionally, I'd find rusted metal pieces, old barrels, parts of mining carts, things like that, half buried in moss and soil. It felt like I was walking through a place that hadn't been touched in decades, maybe longer. By mid-afternoon, I reached a spot where the trees thinned out and I saw the mouth of an old mine. It was just a low, black opening in the hillside, partially caved in, with rotting wood beams leaning against the sides. I didn't go inside. Even though I was curious, I wasn't stupid. Those places collapse without warning. I stood there for a few minutes, just listening to the breeze and the creaking of trees. Then I turned around and started heading back. That's when I noticed it. A second set of footprints near mine. At first, I thought maybe I had just circled around and stepped on my own trail, but when I looked closer, I realized they were a different shape. Lighter boot prints and fresher. Mine were deep and wider from the pack weight. These looked like someone else had been walking, following the same direction I came from. And they were close, like within the last hour close. I stopped moving and scanned the woods. Nothing. No sound but leaves. I stood there for at least 5 minutes, just waiting, listening, watching for movement. Nothing. I tried to shake the nerves off, but something felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, just off. I started back toward camp, this time more alert. I checked over my shoulder constantly, watching the trees for any movement. The woods were quiet, too quiet for how deep in I was. Usually you hear birds, insects, branches creaking, but it was dead silent. When I reached my tent, everything looked untouched. My food was still hanging where I left it, no signs of animals or people. I told myself maybe I imagined the prints. Maybe they were mine after all. The light was fading, and my eyes could have been playing tricks. I didn't believe that, but it helped me sleep. The next day, I stayed near camp. I didn't want to go wandering too far again. I spent time collecting more firewood, filtering water, writing notes in a small journal I'd brought. Around noon, I heard something in the woods, a rhythmic tapping sound, like someone knocking on a tree with a stick. 3 knocks, then silence, then another 3 farther off. It didn't sound like woodpeckers. It was too slow, too deliberate. I waited, heart thumping. The sound came again. A different pattern this time. 2 knocks, a pause, then 4 more. I didn't like it. I stood up, knife in hand, and turned slowly, scanning every inch of the tree line. Still nothing. After maybe half an hour, it stopped. The forest felt normal again, birds chirping, squirrels rustling. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just branches knocking in the wind or some animal behavior I didn't understand. But that didn't sit right with me. It felt like a pattern, like something intentional. That night, I kept the fire going longer. I didn't sleep right away. I sat near the fire, listening, waiting for anything unusual. I kept the knife nearby, even though I knew it wouldn't do much if something really went bad. Hours passed. Nothing happened. Eventually, I went to bed. I woke up around 3 in the morning, covered in sweat. Something had startled me awake, but I didn't know what. I sat up and listened. There was no wind, no night sounds, just stillness. Then I smelled it, a faint, sour odor, like sweat and metal. It was coming from outside the tent. I held my breath, every muscle tensed. I didn't hear anything, no footsteps, no breathing, but I knew something was out there. I stayed like that for what felt like an hour, frozen in place, barely blinking. Eventually, the smell faded. I unzipped the tent as slowly and quietly as I could and peeked out. The fire had gone out, and the woods were pitch black. I saw nothing. No shapes. No movement. But I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, I checked around the tent. No footprints. No disturbed dirt. But the hanging food bag was gone. The rope had been cut clean through. Not chewed, cut. I found the bag about 30 yards away, ripped open and empty. Food wrappers scattered. Something or someone had taken it. That was enough. I decided to pack up and leave. I didn't know if it was a person, or maybe even a very clever animal, but something was messing with me out there, and I didn't want to find out what it was. I took down the tent, stuffed everything into my pack, and started back toward the truck. About halfway through the hike, I heard footsteps behind me. Not animals. These were steady, two-legged steps. I stopped. The steps stopped. I waited. Nothing. I started walking again, faster this time. I kept my head down, watching the trail, but I kept checking over my shoulder. Every time I stopped, the sound stopped. At one point, I stepped off the trail and hid behind a thick tree. I waited. For almost 10 minutes I stood there, not moving. Then I saw movement, just a shape far back, crossing between two trees. A person, I think. Tall, lean, wearing dark clothes. They didn't look in my direction, just kept moving along the trail I had just left. I stayed hidden until they were gone, then took a wide loop around and bushwhacked my way through the forest, avoiding the path entirely. It took me an extra 2 hours, but I finally reached the truck. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there for a moment, catching my breath. Then I started it and drove. I didn't stop until I hit the nearest gas station 2 towns over. I never saw that person again. I don't know if they were following me on purpose, or just some backwoods loner who didn't want me there. Maybe it was a hunter, a squatter, or someone living off-grid. I'll never know. But the way they moved, the way they stayed just out of sight, how they cut the rope instead of just taking the bag down like a bear would, it all told me one thing. They were watching me the whole time. When I got home, I dumped all my gear in the garage and sat on the floor for almost an hour. I kept thinking how easily that could have ended worse. One wrong turn, one moment of letting my guard down. No one would have found me out there. I still go hiking, still spend time in the woods, but never alone, and never without telling more people where I'm going. That place, those woods, felt like they were hiding something, or someone, and whoever it was, they didn't want me there. I listened, and I never went back. I remember the whole thing clearer than I wish I did. It was around early September last year when I agreed to help a friend's cousin move some of his stuff out of an old shed on his family's property. It was a big piece of land out in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in central Missouri. Not farmland exactly, but lots of overgrown fields, a few tree lines, and patches of thick woods where the land hadn't been cleared in decades. His uncle had owned the land, but had passed away the year before, and no one had really touched the place since. They were getting ready to sell it, and the family wanted everything of value cleared out before listing it. I didn't really know the guy I was helping. His name was Corey, but I needed some extra cash, and my friend said he'd pay me $100 to go out there for the day and help clear and load up whatever junk he wanted to keep. It sounded easy enough. Just a day out in the country, lifting old tools and boxes, maybe an ATV if we were lucky. That's what I thought it would be, but it turned into something else entirely. We drove out in Corey's truck early in the morning. The sun was barely up, and there was still fog sitting low over the grass and in the dips between hills. The road to the place was just gravel, and after about a half hour off the highway, we reached a rusted old gate with a padlock. Corey got out, unlocked it with a key he'd been given, and we drove in slowly down a rutted dirt path that looked like it hadn't been used since the 90s. We had to stop twice to move fallen branches, and one part was completely swallowed by vines. The house itself was just a single-story structure, weather-beaten and sagging on one side. The paint had peeled off in huge chunks, and the roof was patched with what looked like sheets of metal and old tarps. But we weren't going into the house. Corey said we'd stick to the shed and the garage for now because the house had water damage and was probably full of mold. Behind the house, about 100 feet away, was a large wooden shed, almost like a barn, but not quite that big. It was painted dark red once, but now it was mostly gray with age. The doors were wide open, and inside was a mess. Rusted tools, empty shelves, busted furniture, piles of rotten cardboard, and buckets of God knows what. The air inside was thick, dusty, and smelled like old dirt and motor oil. You could hear insects buzzing from the corners and see spiderwebs clinging to everything. We got to work right away. I started sorting things into piles, metal that might be worth something, wood or garbage to burn or throw out, and anything that looked like it might have sentimental value. Corey seemed kind of on edge the whole time. Not jumpy exactly, just quiet. He didn't talk much, didn't look around a lot, just kept lifting things and muttering to himself. Around noon, we stopped for lunch. I sat on an old lawn chair just outside the shed while Corey ate a sandwich and stared out toward the tree line. It was quiet, dead quiet. No cars, no birds, no wind. I remember noticing how weird that was at the time. Even in the middle of nowhere, you usually hear something, crickets, maybe a hawk in the distance, or the wind through the trees. But it was like someone hit mute on the whole world. After lunch, I went around to the far side of the shed where there was a small door, half covered by vines. I hadn't noticed it before. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years. The handle was rusted, and the hinges were stiff, but I managed to get it open with a loud screech. Inside was a narrow set of wooden stairs going down, maybe 4 or 5 steps. I called for Corey, but he didn't hear me, so I just decided to poke around a bit. The air coming out of that space was colder than it should have been. It was damp, smelled like wet concrete and mildew. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The stairs led down to a little cellar, maybe 10 feet by 15. The walls were stone, and the floor was dirt, with some old boards laid across it in a kind of makeshift platform. There were shelves down there, full of old glass jars, some filled with what looked like dried herbs or something worse. There were also tools, big rusty saws, hand drills, clamps. One wall had chains hanging from nails. Not hardware store chains either, heavy ones, like you'd use to lock up machinery or animals. I didn't stay down there long. Something about that space didn't feel right. It was too cold, too still. The kind of stillness that makes your skin crawl. I backed out slowly, shut the door, and moved a few boards and an old cabinet in front of it. I didn't say anything to Corey. I figured it was probably nothing, just an old root cellar, but still, I didn't like it. We kept working through the afternoon. At one point, Corey found an old safe buried under a tarp in the corner of the shed. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a microwave, but it was heavy. We tried to get it open, but it was locked tight. He decided he'd take it home and try to crack it later. Said maybe it was full of old coins or silver or something. We moved it to the truck bed, strapped it down, and went back for one last sweep. That's when the air changed. I can't explain it well. 1 minute, everything was still, just like it had been all day. And the next, it felt like the air got thicker, like walking into a steam room, but without the heat. My skin felt damp. My ears started ringing, not loud, but enough that I noticed. And the light shifted. It was still sunny outside, but everything seemed dimmer, like the sun had gone behind a cloud that didn't exist. I looked at Corey. He had stopped moving and was staring at the tree line again. I followed his gaze. Something was moving in the trees. At first, I thought it was just a deer or maybe a person walking, maybe a neighbor or a hunter. But then I realized it wasn't walking. It was standing still, just barely visible between the trunks. The kind of thing you see only when you're not looking right at it. You know something's there, but as soon as you focus on it, it blends into the shadows. We stood there for a long time, not talking, just watching. The longer we stood, the more I felt like I couldn't move. Like if I did, it would notice. I wasn't scared, exactly, not like horror movie scared, but I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a kid. That primal, animal feeling that something was watching me and I didn't want to be seen. Then, just like that, it was gone. The ringing stopped. The air cleared. And the light went back to normal. Corey looked at me and nodded, like he understood I had felt it too, even though we hadn't said a word. We didn't waste any more time. We locked up the shed, loaded the last few things into the truck, and drove out fast, barely stopping to shut the gate behind us. On the drive back, I noticed something. The safe in the truck bed. One of the straps had come loose. But instead of sliding or shifting during the drive, it hadn't moved at all. It just sat there, perfectly still, like it was rooted to the bed of the truck. When we got back to town, I helped Corey unload, and then went home. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept dreaming about those chains in the cellar, swinging slowly, even though there was no wind. The next day, I texted Corey to ask if he had opened the safe. No reply. I waited a few hours and called. Straight to voicemail. Over the next couple days, I tried again. Nothing. My friend who introduced us said he hadn't heard from Corey either. A week later, I saw something on the local news. A truck had been found parked on the side of a rural road just outside town. Engine off, keys in the ignition, door wide open. No sign of the driver. But in the bed of the truck was a small, old safe, busted open, empty. They never found Corey. Not a trace. No signs of struggle, no footprints, nothing. I never went back to that property. I never told the police what we saw or what we felt. They wouldn't believe it anyway. Hell, I'm not even sure I believe it. But I know what I felt. I know that something was in those woods, watching, waiting, and I know that whatever was inside that safe should have stayed locked. I moved cities not long after that. Got a new job, tried to start fresh. But sometimes late at night, when everything's quiet and still, I get that same feeling, that thick air, that ringing in my ears. I'll look out my window, and I'll see the edge of the woods at the end of my street, just barely visible in the moonlight. And I wonder if it followed me, or if it's still waiting out there, in some other forgotten patch of woods, for the next fool to open a door that should have stayed shut. I don't scare easy, but I'll never go back into the woods alone. Not again. I still don't know what it was. I've thought about it 1,000 times. Every time I lay in bed and try to fall asleep, I think about it. I never told anyone the full thing, not like this. People wouldn't get it. They'd say I imagined it, or try to give it a name, something that fits in a neat little box so it doesn't bother them. But what happened to me didn't have a name. It didn't make sense. It was just something that happened, and I lived through it. I don't care if it sounds weird, or if it doesn't fit anyone's ideas of what can or can't happen. It happened. It was early November, cold but not freezing, and the woods near my cousin's place were empty that time of year. He lived out in the middle of nowhere. One of those places with no streetlights, barely any cell signal, and miles of trees in every direction. I had gone to stay with him for a few days after quitting my job. I was burned out, angry, and needed time away from everything. He said I could use the cabin, even if he wasn't home much, since he was always on the road for work. I liked the silence at first. I liked the kind of quiet where you could hear your own breath and nothing else. No car horns, no people yelling, no footsteps above your ceiling like in an apartment building. Just the wind, maybe a bird here and there. It felt clean. I thought I'd spend a few days reading, walking in the woods, getting some perspective. I brought a journal, too, even though I hadn't written anything in years. The cabin was small but sturdy. One room with a wood stove, a tiny kitchen area, a bed in the corner, and a dusty old couch near the window. There was no running water, just a hand pump outside. No TV, no Wi-Fi, just a little bit of cell signal I could get if I stood out near the back step and held my phone up. I didn't care. I wanted to unplug anyway. For the first 2 days, I did exactly what I planned. I walked trails during the day, came back and lit the stove in the evening, ate simple meals, mostly soup or whatever I could heat on a camp stove. At night, I listened to the fire crackle and stared at the ceiling until I fell asleep. I didn't feel scared or uneasy. I didn't even feel lonely. It just felt quiet, which was what I needed. The third night was when things started to feel off. It wasn't anything big, just a sound. I was lying in bed, still half awake, when I heard something moving outside. Not close, not scratching at the door or anything, just movement. Leaves crunching, something shifting through the undergrowth. At first I thought it was a deer, maybe a raccoon or something. I figured animals wandered around all the time out there, especially with no people around. But it didn't move like a deer. I know how deer sound. They move fast. You hear the hooves, the sudden burst of motion, the clear snap of a twig when they bolt. This was different. It was slower, but still heavy. Something with weight to it, but not in a hurry. Just passing through, I told myself. Just the woods doing what they always do. Still, I got up and looked out the window. I didn't see anything. Just trees, and the moonlight reflecting faintly on the leaves. The fire was low, and the glass was a bit foggy, so I didn't stare too long. I told myself to go back to sleep. I did, eventually. The next day, I took a different trail. I had a map, a real printed one, since I couldn't rely on my phone out there. I picked a trail that looped deeper into the forest, something longer that would take most of the day. I packed a small bag with snacks, water, a flashlight just in case, and my pocket knife. I wasn't planning on needing it, but I always carried it anyway. It was a long walk. Peaceful, mostly. I didn't see another person the entire time. The trail was clear but narrow in places, with lots of switchbacks and uneven footing. Around midday, I sat on a rock and ate a protein bar. The sun came through the trees in thin shafts, and I remember thinking how clean the air smelled, how quiet everything was. Then I heard the same sound again. Not far off. Same slow movement. Crunch, crunch, stop. Crunch again. I stayed still, listening hard. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Could be another hiker, even though I hadn't seen one all day. Could be an animal again. Could be my imagination. I stayed quiet for a long time, just listening. It moved away after a while. I heard the sound get softer, fainter, until it was gone. I stood up and finished the loop, checking my watch more often than usual. I didn't want to be out there after dark. That night, I had trouble sleeping. It wasn't just the sound anymore. It was the feeling, like something was near. Not right outside, but not far. Like the way you can feel someone standing behind you, even when they don't make a sound. Like pressure. The wind picked up during the night, and I heard the trees groaning, branches tapping the roof. I told myself it was just the wind, nothing more. The next day, I stayed closer to the cabin. I chopped some firewood, filled some water jugs from the pump, cleaned up a bit. Around noon, I sat on the porch and wrote a little in my journal. Just notes about the weather, what I'd seen, nothing deep. I started to relax again. But around 3 p.m., I saw something. I was out near the edge of the clearing, about 50 yards from the cabin, gathering kindling. That part of the woods was denser, with thick brush and lots of tall trees. I bent down to grab a bundle of sticks and looked up, and I saw movement. Not a shape, not clearly. Just something shifting behind the trees, fast. It didn't move like a person. There was no sound, which was the weirdest part. No crunching, no snapping twigs, nothing. It just moved. Then it was gone. I stood there for a long time, heart pounding, staring into the trees. I scanned every shadow, every branch, waiting to see if it would move again. It didn't. I walked back slowly, eyes on the woods the whole time. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat up with the fire burning bright, my knife on the table beside me. Every little sound outside made me jump. I kept getting up and checking the windows, trying to see if anything was out there. I didn't see anything. Just before dawn, I finally dozed off. When I woke up, it was still cold, still gray outside. I made some instant coffee and tried to calm myself. I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was letting my imagination get the best of me. I'd been alone for days in the woods, no real human contact. That messes with your head, doesn't it? I planned to leave the next morning. I figured I'd pack up, thank my cousin, and head home. I didn't need to stay another night, but I did, because when I went out to pump water that afternoon, I found tracks. Not animal tracks. Not deer or raccoon or even bear. These were footprints. Bare human footprints. They were just outside the clearing, near the tree line. Big ones. No shoes, no tread. Just Saul's toes, heels. Clear as day, pressed into the soft ground. Fresh. There were 5 of them in a row, like someone had walked along the edge of the woods and then turned back. I followed them for a few feet, heart hammering. Then they just stopped. Not like they turned. Not like the person walked away in another direction. They just ended. The ground around them wasn't disturbed. No other tracks. No drag marks. Nothing. Like the person had been there and then vanished. I went back inside, locked the door, and didn't come out again. I didn't light a fire that night. I didn't want the light to give me away. I sat in the dark, listening, and I heard it again. Only this time, it wasn't moving away. It circled the cabin. I could hear the leaves and twigs underfoot, crunching slowly. A pause, then more crunching. It went all the way around. Once, then again. Then it stopped behind the cabin, where I couldn't see. I didn't move for hours. Just sat there in the dark, holding my knife, staring at the door. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, it was morning, bright and cold and silent. I didn't waste time. I packed everything. I tossed my gear into the back of my car, didn't even stop to eat. I didn't check the woods, didn't go near the spot with the footprints. I just left. I didn't tell my cousin what I saw. I didn't think he'd believe me. Maybe he would have, maybe not. I didn't care. I just wanted to get away. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not the sounds. Not the shape I thought I saw. Not even the footprints. What kept me up at night was one thought. Who walks barefoot, deep in the woods, in November? And why did they stop at the edge of the clearing, like they were watching? It started with a favor I didn't really want to do. My cousin had bought this old property upstate, a couple hours from where I live. It was cheap land, way out in the hills, and he wanted to turn it into a cabin retreat. I hadn't seen him in a while, and out of the blue, he called and asked if I could help him move some things into a storage shed on the property. He had a bad back and didn't want to hire strangers. I figured it would be a quick drive, maybe a night or two helping him move stuff, and I'd head back home. I packed light, just a duffel bag, some snacks, my boots, and a few tools in case he needed them. I left early in the morning, filled up the tank, and hit the road. The drive started normal, but once I got into the rural areas, things thinned out fast. Fewer signs, fewer cars, fewer houses. The last hour was all dirt roads and forest-lined gravel paths. By the time I pulled up to the property, the sky was clouding over. The land was nothing but a clearing cut into thick woods, with a lopsided barn, a half-collapsed house, and a new metal storage shed that looked completely out of place. It stood there like it was dropped from a helicopter, shiny, new, and wrong in that setting. My cousin wasn't there. I waited for about 20 minutes, walked around the place, and called him a couple times. No signal. Typical. I figured maybe he went into town for something and would be back soon. There was no gate, no fences, nothing but thick brush and trees in all directions. I sat on the hood of my truck and ate some chips, staring at the shed. After another 30 minutes or so, I got tired of waiting and decided I'd look around a bit, just to kill time. The barn was leaning to one side, with holes in the roof and a floor full of old junk, rusted tools, broken ladders, a few animal bones, and spider webs thick enough to catch a bird. I didn't stay in there long. The house was worse. Half the roof was gone, and the floorboards were rotted and sagging. There were old chairs, broken glass, and the smell of mildew soaked into everything. One of the rooms had a huge hole in the floor that went all the way down into a dark crawl space. I didn't even get near that. It felt wrong. I couldn't say why, it just did. Eventually, I walked back to the shed. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The lights weren't wired up, but sunlight came in through two small windows. Inside were a few plastic bins, a rolled-up tarp, some bottled water, and a folded-up cot. It looked like someone had been using it as a place to sleep. There were wrappers, an old coffee mug, and even a portable gas stove in the corner. It felt strange that he hadn't mentioned that. I sat down on the cot and thought about heading back to town. But the weather had turned worse. Thick gray clouds now covered the sky, and a cold wind was picking up. I didn't want to drive those roads at night in the rain. I figured I'd stay the night in the shed. I had a flashlight, and there was enough bottled water and snacks to make it through one night. By the time night came, it was pouring rain. The wind howled through the trees, and I could hear branches cracking somewhere in the woods. I shut the shed door and locked it from the inside with a metal latch. I rolled out the sleeping bag I'd brought and lay down on the cot. It took a while, but I eventually fell asleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still pitch black. The rain was still coming down hard, and the wind made everything creak and groan. What woke me up wasn't the storm, though. It was something else. I felt it before I heard it. A pressure. Like when someone walks into a room and you don't hear them, but you know they're there. I lay still for a minute, not even moving my head, just listening. Then I heard it. Something outside. Very faint. A crunching sound. Like footsteps in wet grass. Slow. Deliberate. I held my breath. There was nothing for a moment. Then I heard it again. Closer this time. Still slow. Still heavy. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Pause. I sat up, grabbed my flashlight, and pointed it at the door. I didn't turn it on yet. I just waited. The metal walls of the shed made it hard to tell where the sound was coming from. It could have been to the side, or behind, or right in front. I couldn't tell. I stayed like that for maybe 10 minutes, breathing slow, flashlight ready in my hand, heart pounding. Then, something tapped the shed wall. Not loud, not fast, just one soft tap, like someone gently knocking with one finger. I froze. A second later, another tap. Then silence again. I finally turned on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the dark like a blade. I didn't want to open the door. Every instinct in me screamed to stay inside, but I had to see. I stood up, unlocked the latch as quietly as I could, and opened the door just an inch. Rain sprayed in sideways, and cold wind hit my face. I shined the light out. There was nothing there. I opened the door a bit more, stepped out barefoot into the mud, and swept the beam across the clearing. Still nothing. I walked slowly around the shed, listening. The storm covered most small sounds, but I didn't hear anything else. No more footsteps. No more tapping. Eventually, I went back inside, locked the door again, and sat on the cot until morning. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When the sun came up, the rain had stopped. Everything was soaked and fog clung to the tree line. I opened the shed door and stepped out into the wet grass. I walked around the shed, checking the mud for any sign of what I might have heard. At the back of the shed, I found footprints. Clear ones. Not mine. They came out of the woods, circled the shed, and went back the way they came. Barefoot prints. Deep, heavy wide. Too wide for a normal person. I stood there staring at them for a long time. I packed up my things, locked the shed, and left. No sign of my cousin. No messages. I never heard from him again. I called the sheriff in the county and told them I hadn't heard from my cousin and that his property was sitting empty. They said they'd check it out, but I never got a follow-up. I stopped asking after the third call. I tried not to think about it, but I couldn't let it go either. About a month later, I drove back out to the property. Everything was the same. The shed was still there locked, the barn and the house untouched. But the strange thing was, all the stuff inside the shed was gone. The plastic bins, the tarp, the water, the cot, even the gas stove. Everything had been cleared out. The shed was empty except for a single thing in the center. A pair of boots. Not mine. Not my cousin's size either. They were huge. Too big for any normal man. They were caked in mud, with the laces torn off, and one of them had what looked like a crack running down the side, as if something had stepped on it too hard. I left them there and drove back home. I haven't been back since. I don't talk to anyone about it, not even my family. Sometimes I wonder if I should have gone looking for my cousin, checked hospitals or reports something. But I didn't. And sometimes at night, especially when it rains, I think about that slow crunching sound. And I wonder what would have happened if I had opened that door a second earlier, or if I hadn't woken up at all. I don't usually take time off work. I keep my head down, stay busy, and try to avoid the kind of situations that make life complicated. But about a year ago, after months of non-stop pressure at my job, my supervisor basically forced me to take a week off. I didn't have a plan. I didn't want to sit at home with nothing to do. So I borrowed my cousin's old cabin. It was deep in the woods, about a 5-hour drive from the city. No cell signal, no Wi-Fi, just trees and silence. He told me it was a good place to reset. I left on a Sunday morning and drove until the roads went from pavement to gravel to dirt. The last hour of the drive, I didn't see another car. No people, just endless pine trees. I stopped once to let a deer cross, and then I didn't see another living thing for miles. When I pulled up to the cabin, it was exactly how he described it. Old but sturdy single floor, with a small porch and a locked shed out back. There was a wood-burning stove inside, a couch, a bed with a thin mattress, and a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been used in years. But it was clean. The air smelled sharp and fresh, and I thought it might actually be good for me. The first 2 days were quiet. I read books I hadn't touched in years. I took short walks down the trails behind the cabin. I listened to the wind in the trees and tried to forget about deadlines and meetings. I cooked over the stove, went to sleep early, and tried not to think too much. It was boring in a good way. I didn't see or hear a single person or car the entire time. On the third night, something felt off. I went to bed around 9:30. It was dead silent outside. I lay on the thin mattress, half asleep, when I heard a noise that didn't fit the usual sounds. It wasn't an animal or wind. It was a dull, scraping sound, like something dragging over wood. It came from behind the cabin. I sat up and listened, heart already beating faster. The noise lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then it stopped. I stayed frozen in bed for a few minutes, listening hard, but it didn't come back. I told myself it was probably a branch falling or a raccoon messing with the shed. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I started to drift off, I thought I heard it again. Just barely. Something brushing against the wall. Scraping. The next morning, I walked around the cabin to check. The shed behind the cabin was locked, just like before. I couldn't see anything out of place. No marks on the walls. No animal tracks. I shook it off and told myself it was nothing. Maybe I'd been dreaming. Maybe the wind made it sound like something it wasn't. That night, it came again. I was sitting on the porch after dinner. The sun had just dropped below the trees, and the woods were starting to dim. The scraping sound came from the side of the cabin this time. Not loud, but steady. A dragging noise, like someone pulling a rake across the wall. I stood up fast, heart pounding. I looked, but saw nothing. The woods were still. No animals, no people. I grabbed the flashlight and walked slowly around the cabin. I expected to see claw marks or scratches on the wood, but again, there was nothing. I checked the shed again. Locked. The key my cousin gave me didn't open it, and he'd told me not to mess with it. Just old tools and junk, he'd said. I was starting to wonder if someone was messing with me. Maybe some local kids knew the cabin was empty and decided to screw with the city guy. But it didn't feel like a prank. It felt focused. That night I barely slept. Every little sound put me on edge. At one point, I got up and stood at the window for almost an hour, flashlight in hand, staring into the trees. I didn't see anything move, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. On the 5th day, I decided to leave early. I didn't tell my cousin. I didn't want to sound paranoid. I packed everything and started loading up the car. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In the dirt behind the cabin, there were tracks. Not boot prints, not paws. It looked like something had been dragged. A long, shallow groove, about as wide as my arm, ran from the woods to the back of the cabin and disappeared under the porch. I crouched down and looked underneath. It was dark, full of leaves and old wood. I couldn't see much, but the groove clearly ended right under the center of the porch. I didn't know what to make of it. I backed away and went around to the front. The air felt wrong, heavy, like the trees were holding their breath. I loaded the last of my stuff into the car and started it up. That's when I saw something in the mirror. Just for a second, barely more than a flash, I saw a shape move at the edge of the trees behind the cabin. It wasn't a person. Too low, too fast. But it wasn't an animal either. Not the way it moved. It was like it slid across the ground, almost flat, and then was gone. I put the car in gear and didn't stop driving for 3 hours. I didn't even slow down until I saw pavement again. I didn't stop to eat, didn't stop for gas until the tank was almost empty. When I finally got home, I didn't unpack. I just sat on the couch in the dark and stared at the wall for a long time. I didn't talk about it for weeks. Then one day I asked my cousin about the cabin. I didn't tell him what happened. I just asked if anything weird had ever happened there. He paused for a long time. Then he said, "It's quiet, but sometimes you hear things." That's all he said. I didn't push. Months went by. I got back to work. Things went back to normal. But I never forgot the sound of that dragging. I never forgot the tracks in the dirt. And sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I still think I can hear it, the soft, steady scrape of something moving slowly across wood. A few weeks ago, I found the key he gave me for the shed. I'd thrown it in a drawer and forgotten about it. I picked it up and turned it over in my hand. Something had scratched the surface. 3 long marks across the back of the key, as if it had been dragged against something rough. I didn't do that. I didn't drop it. I never even used it. I threw it away. I don't go into the woods anymore. Not even local trails. I don't camp. I don't hike. I stay in places with walls and locks and people nearby. I keep the lights on when I sleep. And when I hear a sound in the night, something small, something outside, I don't check. I just lie still and wait for silence. Because some things don't want to be seen. And if they come once, they can come again. I've worked as a security guard in downtown Vancouver for years now, and by this point, not much surprises me anymore. I've dealt with all kinds of calls, floods, alarms, fights, power outages, medical emergencies, people locked out of their units, elevator entrapments, you name it. But there are some shifts that stick with you long after they're over. Some moments that keep replaying in your head, especially when it's quiet at night and you have nothing but time and silence around you. This happened during an afternoon shift at the HSBC building downtown, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. It was one of those typical weekday afternoons. The lobby was quiet, the foot traffic slowing down now that lunch hour had passed. I had just finished a routine patrol and was back at the desk checking reports when the phone rang. The caller ID showed it was coming from one of the floors high up in the building. I answered it out of habit, expecting something minor, maybe a locked office or someone needing help with the door. But the voice on the other end was panicked and tense. A woman said one of their lawyers had collapsed in their office. She thought he was having a heart attack. Her voice was shaking, and she kept saying his name, Tom. I grabbed the AED kit from the wall behind the desk, keyed into the radio to notify dispatch, and called for paramedics. Then I headed to the elevators. The ride up felt slower than usual. I remember holding the AED tight against my chest, listening to the hum of the elevator motor, watching the floor numbers light up one after the other. I kept checking the battery status on the AED. It was good. Everything was ready. When the doors opened, I moved fast. The office was maybe 10 doors down the hall. The receptionist was standing by the door, waving frantically. As soon as I got inside, I saw Tom on the floor of his office, lying on his back, shirt loosened, his chest rising and falling in short, uneven gasps. His tie had already been taken off. Someone had undone the top buttons on his shirt. He looked terrible, ashen, sweaty, pale in a way that didn't seem normal. He kept one hand clutching his chest and the other grabbing weakly at the floor. I told his coworkers to give him space and stay back. I knelt beside him and checked his vitals as best I could. His skin was cool and clammy. He was conscious, but only just. His eyes kept blinking slowly, like he was struggling to stay awake. I kept talking to him, not to comfort him, just so he stayed alert and responsive. You're trained to do that in situations like this. Keep the person conscious and aware if you can. He looked like he wanted to speak, but couldn't get the words out. I opened the AED, peeled the pads from the packaging, and stuck them to his chest just in case. The device didn't advise a shock, so I left it on monitoring mode. I remember thinking that the paramedics needed to get there now. Any second longer, and we'd be looking at a very different situation. Finally, I heard the elevator chime again, and a couple of paramedics came rushing down the hall with their equipment. They had the full kit, better gear, a professional defibrillator, oxygen masks, the works. I backed off and let them take over while I pulled out my notebook and started recording details. Time of arrival, who was present, what actions I'd taken. I kept glancing at Tom as they worked on him. He was more alert now, talking to the paramedics, although he sounded desperate. He was saying he didn't want to die, that he hadn't written a will, that he needed to call his ex-wife. It was heartbreaking in a way, watching someone realize how quickly things can fall apart. He was pleading with them, grasping at their arms as they tried to work around him. They kept trying to reassure him, telling him he was going to be okay, that help was here. But then something happened that I'll never forget. Tom suddenly stopped talking and looked past them. Not at them, but above them, towards the ceiling, or maybe something beyond it. His face changed. He was already pale, but whatever color was left drained completely. His eyes widened, mouth opened slightly. He looked absolutely terrified. His body recoiled like he was trying to get away, sliding back across the floor weakly, still sitting upright. He didn't say anything for a second, just that wide-eyed, empty stare. Then he started shaking his head slowly. And then he screamed. I don't fucking believe it. No, no, no. His voice was hoarse, but it echoed. Everyone in the room stopped for half a second. The two paramedics tried to calm him down, but it was like he couldn't even hear them. Then he made this guttural, drawn-out exhale, a sort of sigh, but it was heavier, almost like his whole body gave out with it. The monitor beeped, then flatlined. They jumped into action, doing everything they could. CPR, defibrillation, drugs. Nothing worked. Tom was gone. The coroner confirmed it later that night. Cause of death was cardiac arrest. Sudden and severe. The thing that stayed with me, though, what was he looking at? He wasn't looking at the medics, or the equipment, or any of us. He was looking through us. His reaction wasn't confusion or panic. It was recognition. He saw something, or someone, and the look on his face said he knew exactly what it was. And he was terrified of it. No one else saw anything. Nothing out of place. No flickering lights, no sounds, no shadows. Just a man dying while looking at something only he could see. We all tried to explain it away. Hallucinations are common in people going through cardiac arrest. Lack of oxygen to the brain, the body's systems shutting down. But this didn't feel like a random firing of neurons. This felt intentional, directed, focused. And even after he died, the feeling in that office hung around like fog. I stayed there until the medics cleared out, waiting for the cleanup crew, and I swear I kept feeling like someone was watching me from the hallway behind me. But every time I turned around, it was empty. You try to move on from things like that. You don't want to dwell, but it creeps up on you in quiet moments. And just when you think you've let it go, something else happens. It was maybe a week later when I had another incident. This one wasn't dramatic in the same way. No one died, but in some ways it disturbed me more. I had just switched over to a residential building a few blocks away, newly opened, high-end units, mostly professionals living alone or as couples. Everything was clean, modern, automated. Not a bad post to work. It was late in the evening, maybe 9:30 or so, when a woman came down to the front desk. She looked frazzled, a bit embarrassed even, but determined to talk to someone. I could tell something had really shaken her. She had moved into her new place the previous Friday, and said since the first night, she kept hearing someone at her door. The first time, the banging had been soft but persistent, as if someone was testing the strength of the doorframe. She'd called out, and it stopped. But then the doorknob started rattling. She assumed maybe a neighbor was confused or drunk, or maybe a mistake in unit numbers. But when she called the night guard, no one was found. It happened again the next night. Same kind of pattern. A gentle knock or bang, then the doorknob twisting, sometimes for almost a full minute. Again, security responded, but no one was in the hallway. That evening, I offered to walk up with her to her floor, check out the area, and do a sweep. She looked relieved. We took the elevator up and stepped into the hallway. It was quiet, sterile almost, like every other high-rise hallway in the city. We walked to her door. Everything looked normal. No signs of tampering, no marks on the frame, no damage to the lock. She let me into the suite, and we walked around together. Nothing seemed out of place. The place still smelled like cardboard and fresh paint. I offered to hang around a few minutes just in case, and she seemed thankful. I eventually said I'd head back to the lobby and monitor the CCTV footage for a while just in case. As I stepped out of her suite, the door still open behind me, I nearly collided with someone in the hallway. An old woman, gray hair pulled back tight, pale skin thin. She was standing maybe 6 inches from the door, looking right at me. I was so startled I actually jumped back. She didn't flinch, just stared between me and the new tenant behind me. I tried to gather myself. She didn't say anything at first. I asked if I could help her. "No," she said flatly. "Just waiting for the elevator." And just like that, the elevator dinged. She turned and stepped inside. I moved to follow her, instinct telling me something was off. But the doors closed right before I got there. I turned back to the new resident, who was now standing just behind me, looking shaken. I told her to come down to the desk with me. I wanted to check the security footage. My working theory was that the old woman was a relative of the previous tenant, someone who still had access and maybe didn't realize the unit was no longer hers. We got to the desk, pulled up the feed for that floor, and rewound to about 2 minutes before I opened the door. We watched it together. There I was opening the door, stepping out into the hallway, and jumping back, just like I remembered. But there was nothing there. No one. The hallway was completely empty. I jumped back at air. We kept watching. Nothing came out of any other suite. No elevator arrivals. No one entering or leaving. That hallway stayed empty for the next 5 minutes. I reviewed it over and over, trying different angles. Same thing. No sign of the woman. No sign of anyone. I didn't know what to tell the resident. I think I muttered something about checking access logs, and she just nodded. She didn't say much after that. I think she wanted to pretend it hadn't happened. So did I. But I kept thinking about the old woman, about her face, her clothes, how close she had been to the door, how calmly she had stared at me. She wasn't disoriented or lost. She wasn't even curious. It was like she had been waiting there for us, and the second she was done, I was 16 when this happened. I was in high school, part of the drama department, not really one of the standout actors or anything, but I helped out on stage crew and sometimes filled smaller roles when they needed someone. That year, our fall play had just wrapped up. I can't even remember the name of it now. Some period piece with old-timey costumes and a grim scene where a character was hanged. To pull it off, the tech crew had rigged this whole system involving a harness under the actor's costume and a thick black cable strung through the rafters of the stage. It was designed to look like the actor was hanging by their neck, but really, they were supported by the harness. The noose itself wasn't a real noose. It was a loop that just draped around the neck and didn't tighten if you dropped weight into it. Well, not supposed to tighten. After the play closed, Halloween was just around the corner, and the department always did a haunted house in the auditorium as a little fundraiser. We'd throw together spooky props, cobwebs, fake blood. Someone would hide behind the curtain and rattle chains or jump out in costume. It was cheesy, honestly, but it brought in a few bucks and gave everyone something to do. That year, someone got the bright idea to incorporate the hanging setup from the play into the haunted house. There was a suggestion to reuse the cable rig and fake noose, But instead of doing a dramatic scene, we'd just have a dead trick-or-treater hanging from the stage ceiling, like they'd been caught sneaking candy or something. That was the gag. Dumb, dark humor. The costume was a full-body dinosaur suit, bright green with an oversized head and floppy arms, and it came with a matching mask. We added a plastic jack-o'-lantern bucket filled with fake candy wrappers, and whoever played the part would just hang there, totally limp, mask on, like a body on display. Kind of shocking, kind of silly. Typical high school edgelord humor. I volunteered to do it. Maybe I was bored. Maybe I just liked the idea of being part of the scare. Plus, it gave me a good excuse to get out of setting up some of the more boring props. I figured I'd get a few laughs, spook a few kids, and have a story to tell afterward. The rig was still in place from the play. It started with this thick harness you had to wear under your clothes, with a strap that came up your back and clipped into a carabiner attached to the cable overhead. The cable ran through a pulley system, bolted into the beams above the stage, and the tension was managed from the catwalk. Once clipped in, you'd just sort of lean forward off a small ladder, and the harness would take your weight. The noose, meanwhile, was just for show. It went around your neck loosely and gave the illusion of hanging, but all the actual weight was held by the harness. That was the idea, anyway. I remember the first time I got into costume. The dinosaur suit was bulky and warm, smelled like old fabric and gym socks, probably hadn't been cleaned in a few years. I slipped on the harness underneath, cinched it tight across my waist and shoulders, and climbed the ladder. The crew helped me clip into the carabiner. Then I put the noose around my neck and slipped on the dinosaur mask. Then I stepped off the ladder. It wasn't exactly comfortable. The harness pulled hard at my legs and shoulders, bunching everything up, and the dinosaur costume didn't help. After a few minutes, I had to come down to adjust things. The straps were riding up bad, nothing dangerous, just uncomfortable. I was shifting around so much to stay comfortable that it probably ruined the illusion a bit. But most people weren't looking too close. They saw a limp figure hanging, candy bucket dangling, mask covering the face, and just assumed it was a stuffed dummy. That's how it went for the first part of the night. I'd hang there for 10 or 15 minutes, then take a break while someone else scared kids in another part of the haunted house. We had flashing lights, jump scares, some stupid recorded screaming sound that looped over the speakers. It wasn't exactly terrifying, but it was dark enough and noisy enough that most people just moved quickly through the exhibit. Eventually, I took a break again because the harness was pinching, and I figured I'd adjust it before doing another round. I left the costume and mask backstage and unhooked myself. There were a few other students goofing off behind the curtain. Some tech kids, a couple of freshmen pretending to sword fight with broomsticks. Everyone was bored. What I didn't know at the time was that during my break, a couple of the guys had gotten curious about the noose setup. It had been hanging there the whole time, not doing anything, and they started messing with it, swinging from it, yanking on it, pretending to hang each other like they were in a pirate movie. Nothing malicious, just stupid teenage roughhousing. But they didn't know that the noose, while fake in one sense, could still tighten if enough force was put into it. The loop wasn't sewn fixed. It was tied in a way that could be pulled tighter under strain. It just wasn't meant to be weight-bearing. But when they started swinging from it, spinning each other around, that slack loop around the neck cinched up. Then they left it. I came back maybe 10 minutes later. The noise backstage was constant, shuffling laughter, props being dropped or kicked across the floor. I didn't think anything of it. I grabbed the dinosaur costume, tugged it on again, clipped the harness under it, climbed the ladder, slipped the noose over my head like before, put on the mask, and leaned forward into the rig. The second I dropped my weight, everything went wrong. The noose snapped tight around my neck. Not all at once, but with this sudden constricting tension that clamped down right under my jaw. It didn't break my neck or anything, but it squeezed in just the right place to choke me instantly. The pressure was brutal. My airway closed up, and I felt the blood in my head just stop moving. The harness was still supporting my body, but the rope, now tight and unmoving, was pressing against my throat with its full weight, digging into the soft parts of my neck. At first, I didn't even panic. I just sort of blinked and thought, that feels weird. Then everything started to fade. It's hard to describe. I wasn't flailing or kicking because the harness held me steady, and I hadn't realized what was happening. It felt like I was falling asleep, like nodding off in class after pulling an all-nighter. Warm, distant, like sinking into a thick cushion. My arms hung limp. My legs went numb. The edges of my vision turned black. Then, something in my head just lit up. This brief, electric spike of awareness, like an internal alarm clock going off. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. But I suddenly remembered. I was hanging. I was choking. And nobody knew. There were people just on the other side of the curtain, feet away. Kids walking through the haunted house, parents laughing nervously, classmates running props or scaring kids with rubber axes. But no one was looking at me. No one could see me in the dark. To them, I was just a prop. A motionless dinosaur dummy swinging gently from the ceiling, holding a candy bucket. And I was about to die. Some instinct kicked in. I reached out blindly with one hand, couldn't find anything. I groped at the air, tried to move my legs. Nothing. My body was lead. My vision was almost gone. But I turned my head just a little, felt the noose bite harder into the side of my neck, and managed to get a hand on the ladder. I don't even remember climbing it. I just remember pressure, then relief. My lungs opened up all at once. I sucked in air so fast it hurt. My vision came back in waves. Everything was spinning. I was sweating, legs shaking, whole body trembling like I'd just come out of an ice bath. My hands fumbled at the noose, tugged it off, then unhooked the harness with shaking fingers. I just stood there for a long moment, bent over, holding my knees, gasping for air. No one noticed. I slipped backstage again, peeled off the costume, dropped the mask on a chair, and sat down behind the curtain. My pulse was racing. My neck was sore, red where the rope had pressed in. I rubbed at it gently, still shaking. My head throbbed like a drum. I didn't say anything to anyone. I didn't tell the teacher. I didn't tell the other students. Not that night. Eventually, I stood up, walked to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, then just walked out of the building. I didn't even say goodbye. I just went home. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of what almost happened hit me hard. I could have died. Not from some dramatic fall or accident on stage. Not from some twisted plan or stunt gone wrong. I could have just died there, silently, in the dark, dressed in a stupid dinosaur costume with a plastic candy bucket hanging from my wrist. And no one would have noticed. Not for hours. They would have laughed, maybe. Commented on how realistic I looked. Thought I was the best scare of the night. Even applauded the realism. And I would have been dead the whole time. It made me feel cold all over. I imagined it in detail, how they would find me. The slow realization, the horror. The stories that would spread after. The newspaper articles. The hushed conversations in the hallway. The rumors that would twist and grow with every retelling. And I knew exactly how the legend would sound, because I'd heard ones like it before. Every school had them. That drama kid, the one who used to hang from the ceiling in the haunted house, he wasn't acting. He died up there. They say he choked to death during the Halloween event, and nobody noticed until the end of the night. His girlfriend found him, still hanging, when the lights came on. The teachers all say it's not true, but it happened. I could hear it playing out in my head like an urban myth in the making. Except it almost wasn't a myth. It almost happened to me. And the worst part is how easy it would have been. Just a few more seconds. That's all it would have taken. If I'd passed out completely, I would have never grabbed the ladder. The harness would have held my weight long enough for me to quietly stop breathing. By the time someone realized I wasn't faking, it would have been too late. I never wore the harness again after that night. Never touched that stage rig again either. I told a few close friends. For the past few months, I've been trying something most people probably wouldn't even think about, or if they did, they'd laugh it off as some kind of half-baked internet experiment. But I've taken it seriously. I've been training myself to stay aware while falling asleep. I'm not talking about your average lucid dreaming stuff, floating around in imaginary cities or flying over oceans. I'm talking about something a bit stranger. I stay conscious through the part where my body shuts down. I don't fully fall asleep. I just hang there, right in the middle. The idea came from this article I read online, buried in some obscure corner of a forum where people talk about altered states and brain tricks. Some guy mentioned the hypnagogic state, that weird mental place you pass through when you're drifting off. I'd felt it before, like hearing random voices or seeing flashes of light behind closed eyelids. But this guy had made it sound like you could stay there if you trained yourself, and he said something about gaining more control over dreams. It sounded like a challenge. I wasn't looking for anything paranormal. I just thought it'd be cool to understand my mind better, maybe even get some control over my sleep habits. At first, it was nothing. I'd lie in bed, close my eyes, and just focus on not letting my thoughts drift too far. I tried to stay mentally awake, even as my body relaxed. Most nights I just ended up fully awake or fully asleep. Nothing in between, but I kept at it. I developed a system, lying completely still, no lights, phone far away, room just a little cool, fan on low for white noise. I'd breathe slowly, count my breaths, and ignore the urge to move or itch or shift. It took weeks, but eventually I started getting glimpses of what that guy was talking about. I'd be lying there, still as stone, and I'd notice that my arms or legs felt like they weren't there anymore. Just gone. Then I'd get this rushing sound in my ears, like wind or static. And then voices. Not loud, but clear enough to make out words. Sometimes they were talking about things I'd thought about during the day. Other times, totally random, like snippets of someone else's conversation. I couldn't control them, but I could hear them. I knew they weren't real. I was aware I was lying in bed, alone, but it didn't feel like I was alone anymore. The first time I heard them, I jolted myself fully awake. I'd finally hit that weird halfway point, and I ruined it with surprise. But that was the last time I let that happen. After that, I got better at riding the line between waking and sleeping. I could last maybe 2 or 3 minutes at first, then 5, then 10. My body would go numb, and my breathing would slow down on its own, but my mind was sharp. The voices would come, sometimes even a face or two hovering in my peripheral vision. I couldn't really look directly at them, just catch the edges, like when you think someone's standing behind you. And here's where it started getting weird. Not in a supernatural way, just uncomfortable. The voices started acting more in sync. Like before they were random, but now they almost seemed like they were aware of me. Not talking to me, but around me. Sometimes I'd hear them mention my name. Not loudly, just buried in the noise. And sometimes they'd be quiet for a second, and I'd feel this overwhelming sense that something was looking at me. It wasn't terrifying, but it wasn't normal either. There's a thing that happens called sleep paralysis. I'd heard of it before. Most people talk about shadow people or demons sitting on their chest. I never had any of that, but I definitely got the paralysis. Once my body shut down, I couldn't move a muscle. I'd try to lift a finger or twitch my leg, and nothing would happen. Breathing was still fine, but everything else was locked. It should have scared me, but I was ready for it. I knew it was part of the process. The hardest part was balance. If I focused too hard, I'd wake myself up. If I let go too much, I'd fall into unconscious sleep and forget everything. But when I hit the sweet spot, I had this window, maybe 5 to 15 minutes, where I was in full awareness. Not awake, not dreaming, just suspended. On a few lucky nights, I'd transition into lucid dreams from there. Those were amazing. I could walk around, talk, fly, control the world. But I wasn't chasing dreams. I was more interested in that in-between place. That's where it felt like something real was happening. Over time, I noticed I was getting better at guessing how long I'd been out. I'd wake up, check the clock, and be within 5 minutes of the exact time. It became a habit. Go under, stay aware, come out, guess the time. Almost like diving. I even kept a little notebook next to my bed and wrote down what I heard or saw. Sometimes it was gibberish. Other times it was eerily clear. Once, I heard what sounded like my mom calling me from the hallway, even though she lives 2 cities away. Another time, I saw a man sitting in the chair across from my bed. Just sitting, not moving. I knew he wasn't real. I could barely make out his face, but I remembered the shape of his shoulders. One night stands out more than the rest. It was a Thursday, I think. I'd had a long day, but wasn't too tired. That's the best condition, tired enough to drift, but not so exhausted that I crash. I got into bed, did my routine, and started the descent. Numbness came fast, then the rushing sound, then the tingling, then silence. Not the usual kind. This silence was deep, pressurized. It felt like being underwater. Then the voices came, slow and distant. I heard a man and a woman talking. I couldn't make out their words at first, just tones, like someone arguing quietly in another room. Then after a while it shifted. The man was saying my name, not shouting it, just saying it over and over again, like he was testing how it sounded. It wasn't my full name, just the first name, repeating every few seconds. I tried to stay calm. It wasn't real. I reminded myself of that. Just noise in my brain. But then I felt something shift in the air, like the room was tightening. The air got heavy. Not hot or cold, just dense. And I could sense something at the foot of my bed. Not see it, just feel it. I didn't panic though. I was used to that feeling by now. But this time, the sensation stayed longer than usual. I blinked, or at least tried to. In that state, it's hard to know what you're physically doing. But in my perception, my eyes moved, and I could see the room in a dim, grayish hue, like I was looking through smoked glass. The figure was there. Not clear. More like a person-shaped shadow standing near the edge of the bed. Not moving, just watching. I waited, trying to see if it would do anything. Sometimes these figures just vanish. This one didn't. It stepped forward once. Just one step. I told myself it was a projection. A hallucination caused by the brain in a semi-dream state. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't coming from me. Like I wasn't imagining it, like it was just there. Not something I made, but something I noticed. That was the part that made my skin crawl. Even without moving, I could feel the hairs on my arms raise. Then came the pressure, like a weight on my chest. Not pain, just heaviness. I knew this one. Classic sleep paralysis symptom. But this time it was centered, like someone had placed a hand right in the middle of my chest and was pressing down, not to crush me, just to keep me still. I focused on my breathing, counting seconds. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow, controlled. The figure didn't move again, but the room felt like it was tilting slightly, like gravity was shifting. I held on as long as I could, probably 10 minutes. The voices faded out, the pressure lifted, and the numbness started to release. My toes tingled, then my legs, then my arms. I blinked again, this time for real, and the room was back to normal. Quiet. Still. I sat up slowly, checked the clock. 3:48 a.m. I'd gone under at exactly 3:30. I guessed 18 minutes. When I checked later, it was 19. Close enough. I should have felt proud. That was one of my longest sessions. But instead, I felt off. Not scared, not sick. Just a little uneasy. Like I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. The way you feel after walking in on something private, even if it's not dangerous. I wrote everything down, closed the notebook, and tried to go back to sleep. I didn't get back into that state again that night. The next day was normal. I went to work, went through the motions, but kept thinking about the figure. Not the voice, just the figure. Something about the way it stood. It didn't feel like a hallucination. It felt placed, like it had its own purpose. But again, I told myself it was just a trick of the mind. A side effect. Nothing more. But here's the thing. That night wasn't the last time I saw it. Over the next few weeks, that figure returned. Not every night. Just randomly. And never moving much. Always standing. Sometimes near the bed. Sometimes by the door. Sometimes in the corner. I never saw it fully. Always peripheral. Always in that weird glassy vision that comes during the halfway state. I couldn't talk to it. I couldn't move. I could only observe. I stopped trying to push deeper. I stopped chasing lucid dreams. I didn't give up the practice completely, but I started keeping it shorter. Less frequent. Just enough to stay in tune, but not enough to fall too far. I realized something. Maybe we're not supposed to hang out in that space too long. Maybe the brain designed it as a hallway, not a room. You're supposed to walk through, not stay. I've told a few people about what I've been doing. Some call it creepy. Some think I'm making it up. Others just nod politely and change the subject. I don't blame them. It's not normal. But I know what I've seen, and I know how it felt. I still do it sometimes. Once a week maybe, just to keep the skill alive. I hadn't planned to go hiking that weekend. Honestly, I had planned to just stay home, order takeout, and catch up on some sleep. But then I got a text from Rob, saying he and his cousin were going to check out this trail up north near the border of the national forest. And did I want to come? It wasn't anything official. Just a long, narrow trail through thick woods that someone had found on a forum. A couple of backpackers said it was quiet, barely touched, and good for a full-day loop if you started early. I didn't know Rob's cousin Mason, but I figured why not. I had the gear, and I hadn't been out in the woods in a while. A break from the city felt right. We met at Rob's place early that Saturday morning. I drove, since I had a 4-door with enough trunk space. Rob sat up front, and Mason took the back seat. He was quiet, tall, built like a guy who lifted regularly but didn't talk about it. He didn't say much the entire drive except to comment on the fog settling low over the hills as we climbed into the countryside. It was a 2-hour drive before we got near the start of the trail. There wasn't even a parking lot, just a small patch of gravel off the side of a narrow road, barely wide enough for 2 cars. I pulled in and killed the engine. We stepped out, stretched, and shouldered our packs. The trail was unmarked, but Rob had the GPS coordinates saved from the forum. It started through some tall grass, behind a line of poplar trees. The moment we stepped under their shade, the air changed. It got quiet. The kind of quiet where you suddenly realize how loud the city really is. No engines, no sirens, just wind, leaves, and birds. We kept walking. The trail dipped into a steep ravine, then leveled out into dense woods. It was narrow, overgrown in places, barely wide enough for one person. I let Mason take the lead, then Rob, then I followed in the back. The trees got thicker the deeper we went. Sunlight barely came through the canopy. Around noon we stopped for a snack. I took off my pack and leaned against a big rock while chewing a granola bar. We talked a little then, mostly about how peaceful it was, how different it felt from the crowded hiking trails we were used to. No dogs barking, no joggers or families, just us in the woods. That was when I first noticed the smell. It was faint but strange, like something had died not far away. That heavy, rotten smell that turns your stomach even when you don't know where it's coming from. I mentioned it, and Rob sniffed and nodded. Mason just said it was probably a dead animal. We didn't think much of it. Kept walking. About an hour later, the trail split. Rob checked his phone, but the GPS showed only the main trail, nothing about a fork. One path kept climbing uphill to the left, the other dropped slightly and curved into a thicker patch of forest. Mason said we should go right, down into the thick part. He said it looked more like the main trail. I wasn't sure, but I didn't say anything. We followed him. The trail got worse, rocky, uneven, and sometimes it just vanished beneath dead leaves. The trees pressed in closer. I started to notice that even the birds were quieter now. Less chirping, just the occasional rustle, like something moving through brush a few yards away. Then silence again. I told myself it was probably squirrels or deer, but it still made me uneasy. We kept going. Then we reached a clearing. It wasn't big, maybe 20 feet across, but it felt like a sudden break in the forest. The ground was packed dirt, no grass, and in the center was what looked like the remains of a campfire. Old, maybe weeks or months ago. Burnt logs, ash, and a rusted tin can nearby. A broken plastic chair leaned against a tree. Rob said someone must have camped here before, but something about the spot made me uncomfortable. I don't know what it was. The silence, maybe, or how the trees around it leaned inward like they were watching, or the fact that the fire hadn't been put out properly, just left, like someone left in a hurry. We didn't stop long, just enough time for a drink of water before we moved on. That's when things started to feel off. The trail beyond the clearing narrowed into what looked like a game trail, not made for hikers. We followed it anyway, brushing branches aside, stepping over roots and rocks. At one point, Mason stopped suddenly. I almost walked into him. He pointed at the ground. There were tracks, bare footprints in the dirt. Human, not boot prints, bare feet. Deep, clear impressions, toes and all. They looked fresh. No one said anything for a long second. Then Mason shrugged and kept walking. Rob looked at me, uneasy but followed. I didn't want to be alone, so I went too. We kept following the trail, though now I was scanning the trees more carefully, listening harder. Every so often I thought I heard something behind us, twigs snapping, brush moving. But every time I looked back, there was nothing. Just thick forest, dark and quiet. At one point, I noticed the trees didn't look the same. The bark was darker, the trunks closer together, almost as if we'd crossed into a different part of the woods entirely. I checked my watch. It was already after 4. We should have turned back, but none of us said anything. I think we were all trying to play it cool, not wanting to be the first one to say we were creeped out. Then we found the tarp. It was blue, torn, half covered in leaves, and nailed between 2 trees like a makeshift shelter. Underneath it were bits of old rope, food wrappers, and a moldy sleeping bag. I looked closer. There were scratch marks on the trees. Not knife carvings, scratches. Like fingernails or something dull and sharp dragged downward again and again. The bark was stripped raw in places. I felt something tighten in my gut. Mason stood there, staring. Then, without saying a word, he stepped forward and pulled the tarp down. The whole thing crumpled into a heap. He tossed it aside like it annoyed him. We kept walking. That was the first time I noticed the smell again. Stronger now. Not just rot, but something else. Like rust. Like blood. I looked down and saw a smear on the trail ahead. Dark red, drying. Another few feet, and another smear. Then a piece of torn cloth snagged on a bush. That's when Rob finally said he thought we should turn around. Mason didn't respond. He just kept walking. I hesitated, then followed Rob as he tried to convince Mason to stop. But Mason wouldn't. His pace got faster. He moved like he was chasing something. That's when we heard the sound. It was faint at first, a kind of metallic clang. Then again, closer, like someone hitting a metal pole with a rock. Not rhythmic, random, angry. We stopped. The sound stopped too. No wind, no birds, just that stillness pressing down on us like a weight. Mason looked around, breathing hard. Then he started walking again, faster now, almost jogging. Rob and I exchanged a look and went after him. It was getting darker under the trees. The sun had started to drop. The trail was barely visible now, just a suggestion of a path between trees. Mason kept moving fast, too fast. Then he disappeared over a ridge. Rob cursed under his breath and followed. I hesitated, then climbed up after them. At the top, the woods opened slightly, and I saw Mason standing there, staring at something ahead. I stepped up next to him and saw it too. It was a shack, old, leaning, barely standing, made of wood and corrugated metal, half covered in moss and vines. The windows were broken. The door hung crooked on one hinge. A rusted oil drum sat outside, and next to it, a pile of bones. Animal bones, maybe. Too many to count. Some still had bits of fur on them. I felt something crawl up my spine. Mason started walking toward it. I didn't want to follow. Everything in my body screamed at me not to. But Rob went too, and again I didn't want to be alone. The air near the shack smelled like rot and iron. I covered my nose with my shirt. Mason stepped inside. Rob paused at the doorway, looked back at me, then followed. I stayed outside. A minute passed. Then two. Then I heard a sound from inside, like something being dropped. A thud, then footsteps. Fast, then silence. I called out quietly, not yelling, just enough for Rob or Mason to hear me if they were nearby. No answer. I took one step forward. Then I heard a crash, and Rob came stumbling out of the shack, wide-eyed, pale, gasping for breath. He looked at me like he didn't even see me, just brushed past and started running. I ran after him. We didn't stop until we were deep in the woods again. I was gasping for air, my legs shaking. I grabbed his arm and spun him around. His face was blank, just pure shock. I asked where Mason was. He shook his head slowly, then finally said he didn't know. That Mason went down into a basement, that there were stairs, that he heard something down there, something moving. He said Mason went down and didn't come back up. He said he heard a voice, not words, just a sound, and then something heavy moved, like furniture being dragged. That was when he ran. We stood there, frozen, trying to figure out what to do. Go back, call for help, but we had no signal. The GPS was glitching. We couldn't even tell which direction we'd come from anymore. I tried to stay calm, said we just needed to backtrack, follow the trail out the way we came. But nothing looked familiar now. The trail was gone. The forest all looked the same. Same trees, same bushes. No markers, no footprints, no broken branches. We walked for what felt like hours, circling, backtracking. Rob started to panic. I tried to keep him moving. I told him we'd find a road eventually. Then we saw the clearing again, the one with the old fire pit. We had walked in a circle. Rob sat down, shaking, hands over his face. I kept It started as just another job. I was a freelance land surveyor, nothing glamorous about it, but it paid well enough if you didn't mind being alone in places that didn't show up right on GPS. Some weeks, it was city zoning checks or construction layout. Other weeks, I was in the middle of nowhere, charting forgotten property lines, abandoned lots, and old backwoods acreage for developers or private landowners who had no idea what they even owned anymore. This one was supposed to be simple. A real estate company in central West Virginia wanted a survey done on a 300-acre stretch of forest land they'd recently acquired. It was mostly wooded hills with no structures or power lines, just rough terrain. The client warned me there was no cell reception in the area, so I'd need to rely on my radio, topographic maps, and the satellite tracker they loaned me to log the property's edges. They were thinking of leasing the land out for hunting or possibly selling it off in parcels. I left before dawn and made the 3-hour drive out to the property. The access road was barely a road, just a narrow, uneven path through the trees, thick with ruts from decades of runoff and disuse. My old Tacoma struggled with the grade, bouncing hard over buried rocks and exposed roots. It took nearly 45 minutes to go the final 2 miles. I parked at the edge of a small clearing, surrounded by thick woods on all sides. I checked the equipment, loaded my backpack with essentials, water, 2 sandwiches, extra batteries, GPS tracker, compass, flagging tape, and locked the truck. I left a note on the dash with my name, the day's date, and the estimated time I planned to be back, just in case something happened. It's a habit I picked up after years in the field. You learn not to rely on luck when you're alone out there. The air was thick and humid, even for early morning. The trees were dense, tall, and tight together in that Appalachian way, close enough to make you feel closed in after just a few steps off any path. But there were no paths here, just underbrush, brambles, and a solid wall of green in every direction. I picked a starting point from the map and headed out. For the first couple of hours, it was pretty uneventful. Just the usual stuff, thick vegetation, uneven slopes, spiderwebs in the face. I moved slowly, marking trees with tape every 100 feet or so, using the GPS unit to log the perimeter. The land sloped steeply in some places, flattening out in others where old logging had left scars decades ago. There were signs of animals, deer, maybe a black bear or 2 judging by the claw marks I spotted on a tree, but nothing recent. No footprints, no signs of people. Just me and the woods. By early afternoon, I'd covered more than a third of the perimeter and stopped to eat one of my sandwiches. I found a fallen log and sat down, listening to the buzzing of insects and the distant knock of a woodpecker echoing through the trees. I checked the GPS tracker, and it showed everything working fine. I figured I'd make it back to the truck by dusk if I didn't waste too much time. But sometime around 2 p.m., things started to shift. It was small at first. I realized I hadn't heard any birds for a while. The buzzing of insects seemed to fade out too. The air got still, too still. Even the breeze that had been brushing the tops of the trees died off like someone had turned off a fan. I tried to shake the feeling off, told myself I was just being paranoid, that this kind of quiet happened sometimes deep in the woods. But it still sat heavy on my chest. Then I heard something. A thud. It came from maybe 40 yards to my left. Not like a branch fallen, heavier, like something solid hitting the ground. I stood up, listening hard. Then I heard it again. Another dull, heavy thump. It didn't sound like footsteps. It was too slow, too uneven, but it was definitely something moving. I froze and looked around, scanning the trees. Everything was still. I could feel my pulse picking up, my skin getting clammy. I didn't want to call out. There was no one out here. There wasn't supposed to be. I waited a full minute. Nothing. I turned and kept walking, but I couldn't shake it. I kept glancing over my shoulder. I thought maybe it was a deer or a bear, but it didn't sound like that, and I didn't see any movement. Whatever it wasn't following me, not at first. I tried to move faster, though that made it harder to log the property lines properly. By 3:30, I'd reached a section of forest where the trees grew even closer together. It was darker here, the canopy blocking out most of the sun. The undergrowth was thick and hard to move through. I started feeling disoriented, even though I was tracking everything properly. It was like I was walking in circles. I'd flag a tree, walk a few minutes, check the tracker, and feel like I was still in the same spot. The GPS said otherwise, but the terrain kept repeating. Same moss-covered logs, same U-shaped bend in a tree, same rotten stump with mushrooms growing out the side. That's when I heard the noise again. Closer this time. A low grunt. Deep. Almost like an exhale, but too loud, too rough. Not human, but not quite animal either. I turned around and scanned the trees, heart hammering in my chest. My hands were shaking. Still nothing. I stood still for almost 5 minutes. The forest was dead quiet again. Even the wind hadn't come back. I decided to head toward higher ground, thinking I might get better bearings from the ridge shown on the topo map. It took another half hour of bushwhacking to get up there, and by the time I reached the crest, I was soaked in sweat and covered in scratches from the thorns. The view helped. I could see over the tree line, across the distant hills. But something else caught my eye, a narrow trail, almost invisible, running parallel to the ridge. It wasn't a game trail. It was too defined, too straight. Maybe an old logging path. I figured it might lead to one of the old boundaries, so I followed it, hoping it would speed things up. I'd gone maybe 5 minutes down the trail when I found something that stopped me cold. It was a tree maybe 40 feet tall, snapped in half like a matchstick. The break wasn't from rot. It looked fresh. The wood inside was pale and wet. No storm had come through here. There were no signs of lightning, just a clean break, like something huge had cracked it with force. There were prints nearby too. Not boot prints, nothing human. Just large impressions in the moss and soft earth, wider than a man's foot, almost circular, but irregular around the edges like claws or toes. I crouched to study one, trying to tell myself it was just an old bear mark. But the depth of it, the weight it implied, it didn't sit right. I stood up, suddenly aware of how alone I was. The trail stretched on in both directions. Trees loomed over me like watching figures. I felt eyes on my back again. I didn't want to keep going. I turned around to go back the way I came. And then I saw it. Far down the trail, at the edge of where the trees bent in to form a kind of tunnel, something moved. I couldn't see it clearly, just a shape, tall and upright, standing too still. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. It was just there. Tall. Motionless. My chest tightened. My throat dried out. I blinked, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then it was gone, like it had stepped back into the trees. I didn't wait. I turned and ran. I don't know how far I went. My legs were jelly. My breath came in heaves. Branches clawed at my arms and face. My backpack bounced wildly. I didn't care about the GPS or the flagging tape. I just wanted out. But I was lost. Somewhere between panic and exhaustion, I realized I had no idea where I was. I couldn't even hear the direction I came from. My compass needle kept swinging strangely, like it couldn't settle. I looked up at the sun, but the thick canopy made it impossible to tell the direction. I stopped. I forced myself to breathe. I took a sip of water and looked around. I tried to think clearly. I found a dry creek bed nearby and followed it downhill, hoping it would lead to a road or the boundary of the property. The daylight was starting to fade now. Everything was tinted gold and deep green. The forest felt even more claustrophobic in that light. Then I heard it again, this time closer. That same thump, heavy, deliberate, followed by a dragging sound, like something big moving slowly over the ground. I crouched behind a fallen log and stayed still. It passed by 30 feet from me. I didn't get a good look. Just a shape, tall, wide, black against the trees. It moved slow, too slow. Its back was hunched. Its arms, or whatever they were, hung low. I saw one of them brush against a tree trunk, and the bark split open like it had been scraped by something hard. It didn't stop. It kept going, and then the forest was quiet again. I waited another 10 minutes before I moved. I stayed crouched, took the opposite direction from where it went, and kept going downhill. I didn't run anymore. I just walked quiet as I could, stepping over dry branches, listening hard with every step. Eventually, I saw something ahead. A shape. My truck. I don't remember crossing the final stretch. I just remember fumbling with the keys, starting the engine, slamming the lock button, and not breathing until I was 5 miles down the access road. I didn't tell anyone what happened. When the client asked for the data, I said I'd had equipment issues and only managed to log half the perimeter. I returned the GPS unit and made up an excuse about a corrupted file. I didn't go back. They hired someone else to finish it. A few weeks later, I looked up the area again out of curiosity. That stretch of forest? It used to be owned by a paper company that logged it in the 60s. After they pulled out, the land sat abandoned. No roads, no cabins, no homes within 20 miles. Just trees and